LoveLore Library. Chapter 149. In the end, Yan Qiue suddenly asked, "What kind of man do you like?" Xiao Qing was stunned by the question. Then, she blurted out, "Obedient and sensible." Then, she fell silent. Probably because of Lin Qifan, she was naturally wary of men who looked sunny and gentle. Instead, her desire to control soared. She began to like the type that she couldn't stand the most in the past. To put it bluntly, he was the type that Xiao Qing could control. Only such a man could give Xiao Qing a sense of security. After a moment of silence, Xiao Qing added, "And he must like children." Yan Qiue calculated in his mind. He felt that he could do everything except the last one. As for the last one, he could be trained to like children. Yan Qiue relaxed a lot. Then, he inched towards Xiao Qing and looked at Xiao Qing eagerly. "Tell me about your past. Although I didn't participate in your past life, I want to know." There was nothing to hide. Xiao Qing simply picked some of her past to tell Yan Qiue. For example, she was an orphan and had been a soldier for a period of time. She was currently single and raising a child. Yan Qiue's eyes were cold. He was so jealous of the man who could make Xiao Qing give birth to his child. However, Xiao Qing was currently single, which meant that the man was probably dead. Although that was his speculation, Yan Qiue was still worried. He pretended to ask, "Will the child's father object to me living in your house?" Xiao Qing lowered her head and polished her nails. When she heard Yan Qiue's words, she raised her head and smiled. "Don't test him. He's not by my side. I'm afraid he already thinks I'm dead. But this is good. It's more interesting to appear in front of him when he's at his proudest and take everything away from him." When Xiao Qing smiled, her eyes curved into crescents and she looked particularly gentle. However, Yan Qiue felt a bone-chilling coldness. At the same time, his jealousy towards that man turned into real hatred. What had he done to make Xiao Qing like this? Xiao Qing must have been very hurt back then. Otherwise, she wouldn't have hated him so much. When he met that man, he would definitely avenge Xiao Qing. "Let's not talk anymore. You should sleep a little longer. We still have to hurry tomorrow morning." Xiao Qing forced Yan Qiue to lie on the quilt. Yan Qiue still wanted to say something, but then she saw Xiao Qing's gloomy eyes. He immediately lay down obediently, indicating that he was going to sleep immediately. Yan Qiue's thoughts were in a whirl. She originally thought that she would close her eyes to think about things until dawn, but in the end, she fell asleep the moment she closed her eyes. When she woke up again, it was already the next day. When she opened her eyes, the firewood beside her was making crackling sounds. Yan Qiue rubbed his eyes and then saw a small pot on the bonfire. There was something boiling in the pot. Xiao Qing was sitting on the side, using a military knife to cut mushrooms. She cut the mushrooms into small pieces and threw them into the pot. When Yan Qiue thought that last night, it was this military knife that cut off the white worm, he suddenly lost his appetite. Xiao Qing followed Yan Qiue's complicated gaze and looked at the military knife in her hand. Then she suddenly understood and explained, "I cleaned it." Yan Qiue rationally didn't think about how many zombies this military knife had stabbed and how many people it had killed. Then he took a bottle of water to wash his face. Then he sat beside Xiao Qing and waited for breakfast. Xiao Qing didn't need to eat, so there was only one possibility for her to get up early to cook, and that was for him. Thinking of this, Yan Qiue's heart was sweet. Chapter 150. Yan Qiue cooked the mushroom porridge. The rice was fresh, and she added some shredded jerky and chicken gizzards. There was also a plucked and cleaned pheasant lying beside it. The pheasant was caught when she went to look for mushrooms. She was going to make lunch for Yan Qiue. In fact, old hens were the most suitable to nourish the body. There was no need to add anything else. She just added some ginseng and stewed the whole chicken. After stewing, she took the whole chicken out, tore it into strips, and boiled it a little. The soup was delicious and the meat was soft. The key was that it was very nutritious. However, in the wild, there was no time to stew a chicken in such a complicated way. Xiaoqing was just going to chop the chicken and stew it with some mushrooms. The taste was not bad. The mushroom and shredded meat porridge was very delicious. When Yan Qiue took the first bite, he drank a big mouthful because of the love porridge that Xiaoqing specially made for him. After the first mouthful, Yan Qiue's eyes lit up. He finished a small pot of porridge by himself. Finally, he lay on the quilt and rubbed his stomach in satisfaction. His little belly was round and looked very good to the touch. Xiaoqing could not help but stretch out her sinful right hand and lift up Yan Qiue's clothes to touch his little belly. It was soft and the skin was silky smooth. It felt good to the touch. Yan Qiue, who was full and had his belly touched, was a little excited. Even if he could not eat meat, he could at least drink some soup, right? He lay on the quilt and winked at Xiaoqing. Baby, slap me, that ecstasy, the buttons that automatically unbuttoned, and the snow-white chest that was exposed to the air were indeed very seductive. Xiaoqing smiled and stretched out her hand. Yan Qiue's body immediately tensed up, waiting for Xiaoqing to give him pain and pleasure. Then, the buttons were buttoned up by Xiaoqing. Stop fooling around. There is still a monster hiding in the dark. Be good. Pack up and let's go. Yan Qiue's eyes widened. Wait a minute, that was not how the script was written. He was already unable to hold back his thirst. However, Xiaoqing had already started to pack up. She cleaned the pots and pans and put them into her storage space. She began to think that she would go shopping again when she returned to the base to replenish her storage space. Yan Qiue could only watch Xiaoqing pack up and wave to him. Let's go. We'll be safe once we leave this jungle. That thing couldn't possibly follow them all the way back to the base, so as long as they left the forest, they would have gotten rid of that thing. Yan Qiue slowly got up and left with Xiaoqing. The forest was dense, and even the grass on the ground was knee-deep. In some places, the grass was almost as tall as a person. Even Xiaoqing and the others didn't dare to enter such bushes. Who knew what was living in there? If they failed, they would have a lot to cry about. For the rest of the afternoon, that thing didn't come out. At noon, Xiaoqing stewed a pot of chicken stew with mushrooms. The wild chicken in the jungle was especially tasty and chewy. Yan Qiue ate it to his heart's content. If it weren't for the fact that he couldn't preserve it, he would have caught a few back and let Xiaoqing cook it for him. 2 days had passed since the night of the sneak attack. Xiaoqing and the others took a detour and returned to the place where they picked up the lantern flowers. Xiaoqing also picked a lantern flower and used a thin branch as the stem. She strung the stem with a string and used it to make a lantern. At night, the lantern's light was very weak, but it was very beautiful and wouldn't attract wild animals. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. On the 4th day, they were almost at the edge of the forest, but they still didn't meet Xiaomo and the others. The big white bug also didn't appear again. Yan Qiue thought that it had given up. However, even if it didn't appear, the two didn't let down their guard at all. After all, this was a matter of life and death. After easily nailing a snake to the ground, Xiaoqing picked up the lantern. The sun had set, and the mutant animals were about to come out to look for food. Xiaoqing made a prompt decision. Let's stop first. You eat something to replenish your strength. Then we won't rest tonight. We'll leave tonight. We're not far from the forest. Yanqiue nodded and took the initiative to patrol. Xiaoqing used the materials on the spot to skin the snakes she killed and take out their gallbladders. The more poisonous a snake was, the more tender its meat was. When Xiaoqing was active in the Golden Triangle, she often used the local materials and ate all kinds of wild animals. Dealing with snakes was a piece of cake. She pulled out the fangs and removed the venom sacs. The remaining snake meat was not poisonous at all. There was no need to add any seasoning. She simply added some oil, salt, soy sauce, and vinegar to cook it, and it was delicious. The snakes were skinned and boned, so they couldn't be eaten at all. She dug through the grass and picked up 2 toads. Toads were also poisonous. The lumps on their backs would ooze out toad crisps. Although they looked ugly, they could be eaten even if they were skinned. When a person was in a desperate situation, they could really eat anything. Xiaoqing used to have a teammate who was proficient in this aspect. He had stewed radishes with toad meat for her. Without thinking about the raw ingredients, the taste was superb. Xiaoqing added a little bit of chicken essence to make it more fresh, and then a pot of meat was ready. The white and tender meat floated in the milky white soup, and the aroma spread for a few miles. She called Yanqiue back and scooped a bowl for her. "Try it." Yanqiue took it and tasted it. The meat was tender and fragrant. When he bit it, the soup overflowed. It was more delicious than the delicacies he had eaten. Yanqiue couldn't help but take a sip of the soup. The soup was very fresh. Although there were no seasonings, it was enough to be called fresh. He ate several bowls and even drank the soup. He wiped his mouth and touched his belly. Then, he asked curiously, "What kind of meat is this? It tastes very good, but I can't tell what animal it is." Xiaoqing calmly cleaned up the pot and then said, "The big piece is toad meat, and the small piece is snake meat. Remove the bones, cut them into pieces, and stew them." I said it tastes different. Yanqiue froze. He suddenly realized that Xiaoqing seemed to be talking about toads and snakes. His stomach immediately turned. Was he going to vomit, or vomit? Chapter 151. As they ran forward, Yanqiue's expression was extremely strange. She looked like she wanted to vomit but couldn't. In short, her expression was very strange. Xiaoqing, on the other hand, calmly followed beside her. But when they moved forward, she would carefully listen to the nearby sounds. The closer they were to the edge of the forest, the calmer and more cautious she became. The most dangerous place was the safest place. This sentence was the same in reverse. Xiaoqing couldn't help but remind Yanqiue, "Be careful. We'll be able to leave the forest soon. This is its last chance." Yanqiue nodded cautiously. He was also an experienced person. Naturally, he knew how many people failed at the last step. He was now working hard in both his love and career. He didn't want to fail here. The two of them reached the edge of the forest. They were about to step out of the forest, but they still didn't hear the monster's attack. Just when they thought that the monster had given up on them, a large milky white worm drilled out of the ground right under Yanqiue's feet. This time, it had improved a lot. Xiaoqing didn't hear any sound and it reached under Xiaoqing's feet. If it were someone else, they might have been tricked by it. However, Xiaoqing and Yanqiue had been vigilant for the whole night. Naturally, they wouldn't be tricked. Xiaoqing cut the big white worm's head with the military knife in her hand. The worm suddenly lowered its head and swung its tail at Xiaoqing's wrist like a whip. The knife in Xiaoqing's hand spun in a circle as if it was dancing. Then, she stabbed the big worm's tail in a very awkward position. This time, the big worm was stabbed through. It was so painful that the big worm curled its tail and swung it at Xiaoqing with the military knife. Xiaoqing didn't have time to pull out the military knife. She rolled and dodged the whip. The big white worm's tail fell hard on the ground, creating a small hole. Yan Qiue immediately froze the air around the big white bug, making it unable to move temporarily. Xiaoqing stretched out her 10 fingers and grabbed the bug's tail. Even with Xiaoqing's mental fortitude, she couldn't help but want to vomit. Xiaoqing's fingernails had already pierced into the big white worm's tail, and a milky white liquid immediately emerged. However, Xiaoqing's fingernails were exceptionally tough and did not corrode. The big white bug turned its head and wanted to bite Xiaoqing, but Yan Qiue punched it in the face. Yan Qiue's palm was covered with an air barrier, and the punch made the big white bug lean back. Then, the big white bug was tightly bound by vines that drilled out from the ground. Xiaoqing grabbed its tail and tore it with all her might. The big white bug's tail was torn into two from the middle, all the way to the middle of its body. It shook its head and wagged its tail in pain. Suddenly, a strange white light appeared on its body, and the vines dissolved in an instant. The big white bug straightened up like a carp, and the lower half of its body instantly grew back. It turned around and was about to burrow into the ground to escape. This time, it was in pain. It clearly understood that it was definitely no match for Xiaoqing and Yan Qiue. It was ready to give up on Xiaoqing, an excellent host. It wanted to run, but Xiaoqing wasn't going to let it run. Who did it think she was? It wanted to run away after harassing her. How could there be such a good thing in the world? Xiaoqing sneered. She didn't use her vines to block it. She just waved her hand, and a few black cracks suddenly appeared beside the big white bug. The cracks were very small, and looked like miniature versions of lightning. However, the moment the cracks appeared and touched the big white bug's body, the big white bug seemed to be torn apart by something. It was immediately torn into several pieces, and several pieces of its body rolled on the ground. Chapter 152. However, this thing's fatality was really tenacious. It didn't die even after that. With a sway of its body, the lower half of its body slowly grew back. Xiaoqing finally realized that its fatal point was on its head. Every time she attacked its head, it would use its tail to block it. As long as its head was fine, its tail could grow back at any time. It was no wonder that it didn't care about its tail. Just as the big white worm's body grew back, Xiaoqing's military knife was already stuck in its head. Every time it grew back, it was at its weakest. Xiaoqing's guess was right. That knife was stuck right in the middle of the big white worm's head. An inch down, it would be the crystal. The big white worm's body twitched twice, its mouth full of sharp teeth weakly opening and closing. Xiaoqing stabbed another inch in before it completely stopped moving. After a few more seconds, the stiff body instantly dissolved, leaving behind a milky white crystal the size of a fist lying on the ground. Xiaoqing picked it up and used her ability to test it. Then, she threw it to Yan Qiue. It can't be absorbed. You can use it to study this thing. She only intervened once, and the big white worm died. Yan Qiue, who was basically a bystander, was speechless. She felt a sense of shame as if she was being kept after dealing with the big white worm. Xiaoqing heaved a sigh of relief. After the two of them walked out of the forest, they were dumbfounded. This wasn't the way they came at all. Xiaoqing and Yan Qiue walked one round. They were out, but they didn't know where they were. There should be a signal if we walk a little further. I'll contact Xiao Mo and see if I can get in touch with him, Yan Qiue said as she touched the signal transmitter. Xiaoqing nodded. At this time, the sky was just starting to brighten, and half of the sun's face was exposed in the east. The two of them chose a path that seemed easier to walk on and walked forward. They had just taken 2 steps when 2 people jumped out of the bushes by the side of the road. "Stop! Did you come from the jungle?" Xiaoqing gave Yan Qiue a look, telling him not to act rashly. Yan Qiue immediately said, "Yes, we came out of the jungle." "What's the matter?" The 2 men looked at each other and whispered for a while. One of them put away his gun and ran away. The other one pointed his gun at Xiaoqing and said, "Don't move. If you touch my gun, it won't have eyes." A cold light flashed in Xiaoqing's eyes. No one had ever dared to point a gun at her head. Not to mention 2 people with guns. Even if there were 4 or 5 people, she and Yan Qiue could easily deal with them. What she was afraid of was that they had backup and could kill their master with random punches. As Xiaoqing expected, after a while, a small group of people came from not far away. There were about a dozen of them, and the leader was a man in dark sportswear with an MP5 in his hand. He looked to be in his 30s. He came to the 2 of them and asked bluntly, "Did you 2 really come out of the jungle?" Yan Qiue nodded and said, "I'm from Linchuan Survivor Base. We ran into some danger in the jungle and got separated from the rest of our team." The man nodded and said, "I'm not a robber. Now we're going into the jungle to look for something. You 2 come with us. As long as we find it, I promise I'll let you 2 come out safely and escort you back to Linchuan Survivor Base." Yan Qiue's face darkened. They had finally left that damned place, and now they had to go back. He instinctively wanted to refuse, but then he saw the fierce look in the leader's eyes. Yan Qiue knew that if he dared to refuse, these people would definitely kill him immediately. Chapter 153. Besides, he didn't think that these people would be kind enough to let them go. Xiaoqing gave Yan Qiue a look. Yan Qiue understood and said, "Okay, but you have to guarantee our safety." The leader immediately smiled and said, "Of course. You can go to Hunan Survivor Base and ask around. Who doesn't know about me, Mao III? I'm an honest man who keeps his word." Xiaoqing snickered in her heart. What an honest person. She could clearly see that this group of people was plotting something big. Once they found something, they would definitely make a move on Xiaoqing and the others. There were quite a lot of people in this group. If Xiaoqing fought with them, both sides would be injured. Instead of that, it was better to go into the forest and slowly find a way to kill them. "Both of you, tell me your abilities and levels. We can get familiar with each other so that we can cooperate better in battle," Mao III said with a smile. Xiaoqing didn't underestimate this smiling tiger. She secretly released the daughter seed and attached it to Mao III. When a paranormal reached a certain level, it would be easy to find out if a foreign object entered their body. Moreover, the daughter seed couldn't break through their defense. Xiaoqing stuck the daughter seeds on Mao Laosan's body. As long as he was injured, the daughter would take the opportunity to take root in his body. "I'm a wood paranormal. I'm at the peak of rank 2. The plants I tamed are vines and man-eating flowers." Xiaoqing raised her hand and released a vine. She hid her aura very well. The level of her aura was at the peak of rank 2. It was enough to fool Mao III. Yan Qiue wasn't as good as Xiaoqing in this aspect. He couldn't hide his aura perfectly. Fortunately, his level wasn't high. "I'm also at the peak of rank 2. My ability is air manipulation." Mao III was scared for a moment, but then he relaxed. 2 second-order pinnacle paranormals were not weak, but his team's overall strength was much higher than Xiaoqing's, so he didn't have to worry about not being able to control them. As a result, Xiaoqing and Zhang Wuji, who had just left the forest, had no choice but to bitterly return. The two of them exchanged glances as they walked, and were already prepared to strike first to gain the upper hand. Especially Yan Qiue, he clearly saw that Mao the Third was drooling when he looked at Xiaoqing. He guessed that when they found the thing, the first thing they would do was to kill Yan Qiue and do something unspeakable to Xiaoqing. Yan Qiue was very angry. He knew that his wife was beautiful, but she was coveted by another man. That man had bad intentions, so Yan Qiue couldn't stand it anymore. He had to find a way to kill him. If his wife was coveted by another man, he wouldn't be a man if he didn't kill him. Before entering the forest, Yan Qiue had given Xiaoqing 2 small bottles. One of the bottles contained 2 red pills, which were invincible pills that could instantly increase a person's combat strength. In the other bottle, there was a golden liquid. This thing was truly invincible. After drinking it, no matter how serious the injury was, it would be able to revive on the spot with full health and full spirit. Although the side effects of these 2 things were very serious, they could save a person's life at a critical moment. Xiaoqing quietly put the 2 things into her space. She wouldn't use these 2 things unless it was a critical moment and she had no other choice. Yan Qiue didn't give them to Xiaoqing. He planned to take the pills and protect Xiaoqing during a critical moment. When the crisis was over and he was weak, Xiaoqing would protect him. Chapter 154. If Mao the Third observed Yan Qiue's eyes carefully, he would find them extremely cold and cruel. At this moment, Xiaoqing directly lit a candle for Mao the Third. Others didn't know, but Xiaoqing was very clear. Although Yan Qiue was gentle in front of her, he was actually very cruel. He was also very vengeful. Mao the Third had offended Yan Qiue so many times. If he didn't die miserably, Xiaoqing would change her surname. After walking back, Xiaoqing deliberately said kindly, "There are a lot of small flying insects in the forest at night, such as mosquitoes. Once they bite someone, the person will be swollen and filled with pus. If it's serious, the person will even die. We don't have a tent, so we must be careful at night." Mao the Third didn't care about mosquitoes and flies, but he knew that Xiaoqing and Yan Qiue had stayed in the forest for a long time. If they dared to say that, they must have a reason. He hastily ordered his subordinates. As for whether his subordinates would listen to him, he couldn't do anything about it. Would they listen to him? Who would believe that mosquitoes could kill people? However, Xiaoqing insisted that they didn't believe it. At night, they left a few people to keep watch and went to sleep. Xiaoqing and Yan Qiue were special, so they naturally didn't need to keep watch. They slept until dawn. The next morning, they were awakened by a scream. Xiaoqing lazily got up. She rubbed her eyes and looked at the source of the scream. It was a young man. His face was pale as if he had seen a ghost. There was a person lying motionless by his feet. Mao the Third was squatting by the side and checking with a serious expression. Xiaoqing and Yan Qiue walked over. The man was lying on the ground and looked like he was asleep. However, he was no longer breathing. There was a lump on his face and pus was flowing out. It seemed that he had been bitten by a mosquito. However, no one believed that it was a fatal wound. Mao the Third's face became more and more pale. He directly took off all the clothes of the man on the ground and checked for any other wounds. He had to admit that the man was probably bitten to death by a mosquito. But there were so many people around, and a few of them had been bitten by mosquitoes, but they were all fine. Why was he the only one who died? Mao San's face was as ugly as the bottom of a pot. After a while, he said, "Bury him." The other people's faces were pale. They carried the man to the side and prepared to dig a hole to bury him. Mao Laosan stood up and looked at Xiaoqing and Yan Qiue. "Almost all of my brothers were bitten. Why are you two fine? Xiao Qing's eyes turned cold. Boss Mao, are you suspecting that we did something? Mao San said calmly, didn't something happen? I lost a brother, so I have to investigate. Xiao Qing sneered, I was the one who told you that there are mosquitoes in the jungle and they bite people. It's your people who didn't take precautions. What does it have to do with us? The reason why I asked is that you two have been in the jungle for a long time. You are more familiar with everything than me. It's naturally easier for you to do something. Of course, I'm not saying that you two did something. It's just an example. Mao San said with a fake smile, now it seems that you two didn't do anything. But you two must have a way to resist or prevent those insects from getting close to you. Yan Qiyu also replied with a fake smile, it's really a coincidence that we weren't bitten. We either did something or have a way to resist the insects. Boss Mao is so sure, but why don't I know about it? Mao San said with a gloomy face, it's fine if you two don't want to say it. I don't want to force you. I just don't want any more brothers to die for no reason. Chapter 155. Xiao Qing faintly said, we once encountered a kind of white spider in the jungle and were bitten by it. This kind of spider is the natural enemy of many insects in the jungle. Our blood still has a bit of the spider's smell, so no insects will bite me. I see. Mao San was a little disappointed, but he didn't know that Xiao Qing was just making things up. She didn't encounter any white spiders, and even if she did, what kind of spider could get close to her and bite her? They had just entered the forest and lost one of their brothers. The morale of Mao San's team was a little low. Mao San gave them a speech to encourage them, and everyone went on their way. Yan Qiyu, who was leading the way, winked at Xiao Qing with a teasing look on her face. How could a mosquito bite a person to death? Unless there were dozens or hundreds of them biting the same person. Yan Qiyu was the one who did it behind the scenes. If someone were to come and dissect the buried corpse, they would find that his internal organs had been shattered. Yan Qiyu controlled the air and crushed most of his internal organs. However, Mao San did not suspect this, so he did not do a deep examination. As they continued to move forward, Xiao Qing quietly planted the seeds of daughter in several people's bodies. She wanted to slowly cripple Mao San's helpers, and then kill him. It was not that she was cruel and wanted to cripple Mao San's helpers one by one, and then let him die in endless fear. If she did not do it, she and Yan Qiyu would be injured. Of course, Xiao Qing was sure that Yan Qiyu was thinking of the above. He wanted to torture Mao San a few more times. The second person who died soon appeared, because they encountered danger the next day. Xiao Qing made up a type of spider, and they really encountered it. The spider was the size of a fist, and its whole body was white. Only the hair on its claws was black. The silk it spat out formed a web, and some of the web had white bones. Although it was only a piece of bone, it was certain that it was a human-like bone. Even humans had become its food. It could be seen how cruel this spider was. What was even more frightening was that when it encountered an enemy, the large spider would instantly discharge a pile of small red spiders from its lower body. The color of the small spiders was as bright as blood, and it was obvious that they were highly poisonous. At first, it was one of Mao San's men who discovered it. He went behind a tree to relieve himself. Just as he undid his belt, a white jade-like spider suddenly appeared in front of him. Before he could react, his face was covered in spider silk. Then, he felt a sharp pain on his neck and could not get up again. Mao San waited for a long time and didn't see him return, so he sent people to look for him. Then, he saw that the man's body was densely covered with hundreds of spiders. In just a short while, the man's flesh was sucked clean, leaving only skin and bones. He looked like a skeleton. The person who was sent to look for him was frightened. He turned around and wanted to run, but a group of spiders followed behind him. These spiders were very fast, and the person who was chasing after them shouted for his mother as he ran. When Mao San and the others heard his cries, they knew that something bad had happened. They released their supernatural powers and raised their weapons. They were instantly on alert. Then, they saw a row of white spiders behind the man's butt. A kid with a gun tried to shoot a spider in the stomach. With a bang, the spider burst out with green blood and lay there motionless. Before he could rejoice, a bunch of small red spiders crawled out of the dead spider's stomach. Chapter 156. The little red spiders were even faster than the white ones. They caught up with the man in the blink of an eye. One of them climbed onto his ankle and bit him. The man screamed and fell down. The rest of the spiders swarmed over and sucked out another man's jerky. Mao the Third felt a chill seep into his bones. He roared, "Grab your weapons. Don't let this thing get close to you. Fire paranormals, go first." A fire ability user was the first to release a wall of fire. The wall of fire was indeed very useful against the white spiders. Once the white spiders touched the wall of fire, they would be instantly burned to death. Then, they would release countless small red spiders. These small spiders weren't afraid of the wall of fire at all. As soon as they were released, they would lie on the wall of fire. Crunch! 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 In just a short time, they had eaten the wall of fire. The situation was very clear now. The white spiders were not terrible. The red spiders were terrible. The wall of fire killed many of the white spiders and released many smaller ones. Mao the Third felt his legs go soft. He quickly asked Xiaoqing, "Haven't you seen these spiders before? What's their weakness?" Xiaoqing was stunned for a moment. Everything she said before was made up by her. She had never seen these spiders before. On the other hand, Yan Qiue, the know-it-all, had a rough idea of what was going on. He quickly said, "These white spiders are especially fragile. The best way to kill them is to do what the brother just did and use a wall of fire to kill them. As for those red spiders, they can eat elements. You must use something solid to kill them. However, don't get too close to them because they are highly poisonous." Yan Qiue didn't want to kill Mao the Third and his men, but if they were all dead, who would kill the spiders? When Mao Lao San heard this, he immediately organized his brothers who had natural abilities to attack. Fire walls, water balls, wind blades, earth spikes, everything that one could think of. When the white spiders were almost killed, it was time for the wood and metal paranormals to act. As for those strength and speed paranormals, they could only hold small pistols and fire bullets from behind. They didn't dare to go up, because once they were bitten and poisoned, they would lose their lives. After a long time, they finally cleared out all the small spiders. Other than the two people who died at the beginning, there was also a pitiful person. Because he was standing too close to the front, he was poisoned to death by a small spider that broke through his defenses. Another 3 people died at once. The veins on old Mao's forehead popped out. He was so angry that he was about to stomp his feet. If they continued to die like this, they would all die before they could find anything. Without saying anything, Mao Lao San pointed his gun at Xiaoqing. "Why didn't you tell me earlier that you knew about this spider's weakness? Are we late?" Xiaoqing said coldly. "Mao Lao San, you should have a conscience. We told you the news as soon as we realized it. If it weren't for the two of us, you and your team would have suffered a great loss." Mao Lao San's face turned red. He had to admit that Xiaoqing was telling the truth. After a long time, he said coldly, "Let's go." As soon as he took a step, Yan Qiue said lazily, let's change our route and take a detour. Why? Mao Lao-san turned his head and looked at Yan Qiue fiercely. He looked like he would tear Yan Qiue apart if she didn't tell him the reason. Yan Qiue smiled and said, these spiders live in groups. They are like ants and have a spider queen. This spider queen doesn't need to come out to hunt and is only responsible for producing offspring. It spits out a kind of white silk that is poisonous and extremely sticky. As long as you touch it, you won't be able to survive. But after this silk is processed, it can be woven into clothes that are invulnerable. There are a lot of spiders around the spider queen. Chapter 157. When he heard the words invulnerable, greed flashed through third brother Mao's eyes. However, he knew his own limits. He knew that even if his group had a chance to take down the Spider Queen, they would definitely suffer heavy casualties. Their target this time wasn't the Spider Queen, so it was best not to be greedy. Detour. Hearing Mao the Third's words, Yan Qiue was actually a little disappointed. He really wanted to kill the Spider Queen and get some of that spider silk to weave a small vest for his wife to protect her. He and Xiao Qing could definitely take down the Spider Queen, but if they could trick Mao the Third into leading his men, they would be able to exhaust Mao the Third's strength and get the spider silk. It was simply killing two birds with one stone. Yan Qiue secretly noted the location and prepared to get the spider silk when he returned after killing Mao the Third. The detour was a little far. That night, they chopped down a few nearby trees and cleared out an empty space for them to rest. The next day, another person died as expected. This person had died without a sound. There was not even a single wound on his body. Mao the Third's eyes turned red from anger as he thought about the number of casualties. He said coldly, the last one was bitten to death by a mosquito. What about this one? Don't tell me he was bitten to death by a fly. Yan Qiue went forward to take a look and said, he was poisoned to death. Look at his neck. Is there a red line? Mao San lifted the chin of the corpse and as expected, he saw a red line at the position of the main artery. However, Mao the Third still couldn't believe it. Impossible. Everyone slept together at night. How could he be poisoned for no reason? Yan Qiue rubbed his chin and said, he was poisoned by food. Mao the Third laughed when he heard Yan Qiue's words. He pointed at his face and said, do I look stupid to you? Yan Qiue wanted to say yes, but he didn't in the end and shook his head. Mao the Third gritted his teeth and said, if you don't, then why are you trying to trick me? At night, everyone eats the same thing. Why is it that we're all fine, but he's poisoned? Yan Qiue didn't answer Mao San. Instead, she called someone who was familiar with the deceased and asked him, did he eat anything other than dinner tonight? That person thought hard and then said, yes. He picked a few red fruits that looked like cherry tomatoes by the roadside. He said they were wild cherry tomatoes and he wanted to eat them after meals. He even asked me to eat them, but I was afraid something would happen, so I didn't eat them. I even tried to persuade him, but he wouldn't listen. He insisted that his family used to live in the mountains and had eaten these fruits many times. They weren't poisonous. Yan Qiue smiled and said, that's right, it's not a wild cherry tomato, it's a poisonous fruit. But it's not fatal. But he ate a lot of mushrooms that we picked last night. This fruit can't be eaten together with mushrooms. It's just like how you can't eat persimmons after drinking mutton soup, or how you can't eat lemons with prawns. So he died. What Yan Qiue said was reasonable. No matter how angry Mao San was, he could not vent it on Yan Qiue. With a dark face, he reprimanded everyone. Do you know that we are in the forest? In the forest. Don't eat whatever you want just because you have some skills. No one will care if you die. Yan Qiue smiled but didn't say anything. He pulled Xiaoqing along and followed the group. He didn't show much expression on his face, but he was secretly feeling good. He had made up the story about the poisonous fruit not being able to be eaten with the mushroom because it was indeed a wild cherry tomato fruit. He saw the man eat the wild cherry tomato with his own eyes, so he killed him. Even the red line on the man's neck was actually an allergic reaction. However, he was the only one here who knew about medicine, so he lied to them. The real cause of the man's death was that his heart was crushed by daughter. However, Mao San didn't expect that Xiaoqing could kill him secretly, so he didn't notice it until now. So far, there were only 9 of them left, including Mao San. Even if they turned against each other now, Xiaoqing was confident that she could kill them all. However, even a lion needed to use all its strength to catch a rabbit, not to mention that they were not rabbits. Since they had already entered the forest, Xiaoqing didn't mind staying here for a few more days. It was better to accompany them to find what they were looking for, and then kill them secretly to reduce their pressure. When they arrived at the river, there were only 6 of them left. Mao San almost became a frightened bird. Luckily, they had already arrived at the river. The river was very long, and it seemed to cross the entire forest. They still needed to find the wettest place along the river. It was definitely more dangerous by the river than other places, so everyone, including Xiaoqing, was vigilant. Xiaoqing was vigilant because they had already gone through a lot, and they didn't want to fail at such an easy task. As for Mao III, his men had died mysteriously. Up until now, more than half of his men had died. He couldn't allow any more deaths. Otherwise, they wouldn't even have the chance to leave the forest. Therefore, they were especially vigilant. They didn't know whether it was because they had been unlucky for so long, but after walking along the river for a whole day, they finally found what Mao San was looking for. When he saw the crooked, umbrella-like tree, he resisted the urge to cheer. Instead, he looked at it with a fervent gaze. After so many people died, they finally found it. Xiaoqing and Yan Qiue looked at each other. They had been patient for so long, and now they could finally take action. Chapter 158. The tree really looked like a crooked umbrella. Even the branches and leaves were dense and fluffy like a canopy. However, the trunk was too crooked and looked like a screw. Within 15 meters of the tree, not a single blade of grass grew. There was only a dark green vine that clung to the tree. The leaves were shaped like sharp blades, and there were a few red flowers the size of a fist that bloomed sporadically. The petals were golden and looked like flowing liquid. Among them, there were 2 green fruits the size of a fingernail that hung on the vine in the shape of water droplets. Xiaoqing noticed and Mao San's eyes immediately lit up. He quickly walked forward but stopped after 2 steps. There were dangers everywhere in the forest, especially around the important plants. There were definitely mutated beasts guarding them. Perhaps the plants themselves were very dangerous. Mao San did not dare to be careless. If he failed at the last step and even lost his life, wouldn't that be an unjust death? He called one of his subordinates over and let him go forward to test the waters. The subordinate was very brave and walked forward cautiously until he reached the bottom of the tree. There was no danger. The lackey turned around and looked at third brother Mao. Third brother Mao immediately signaled for him to pick the fruit. The lackey nodded and stretched out his hand. Before his fingertips could touch the fruit, he screamed and fell to his knees. The rest of the people looked carefully and saw a palm-sized scorpion on the ground. Its stinger had already pierced through the lackey's shoe and into his flesh. The subordinate twitched on the ground and his skin slowly turned green. After a while, it returned to its normal color and lay on the ground motionless. The others didn't dare to approach. A smart person picked up a stone and threw it over. When the stone hit the underling, his body was like a balloon that had been filled with water. With a pop, a hole appeared in his body. Pus and blood flowed out. In just a few seconds, there was only a pool of pus and a piece of skin left on the ground. The rest of the people's faces turned green. What kind of poison was this? It could melt a person's bones and organs into pus and blood in an instant. Old Mouse Sand gritted his teeth and threw out a wind blade. The wind blade easily cut the scorpion on the ground into two halves. If they looked carefully, they would find that the scorpion came out from the ground. Mao the Third was smart this time. He asked the Earth Paranormals to harden the ground, and then he led the others to walk over carefully. The group of people slowly approached the big tree. Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue stood behind them and didn't move. Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue were not. What Xiao Qing and Yan Qiue needed to do now was to stand there and wait until Xiao Qing's men were almost all dead. Then, they would go and pick up the spoils. Just as Xiao Qing and the others expected, as soon as the group approached the tree, countless vines ignored the hardened ground and drilled out of the ground. When they drilled out, a group of scorpions came out with them. Those scorpions saw people and jumped on them. Mao the Third could cut a piece of them with a wind blade, but there were too many scorpions. They drilled out of the ground in a dense way. With the vines harassing them, it was inevitable that some people would be stung by their tails. Anyone who was stung by the scorpion's tail would turn into a puddle of blood and pus within a minute. It had to be said that the scorpion had no attack power other than its venom. However, its venom was incurable. There was probably medicine that could save them, but those who were poisoned had no chance to take it. Speed-type and speed-type paranormals had it the worst. Those nature-type paranormals could cover themselves with earth and fire shields, but those who specialized in physical evolution could only scurry away like rats. Chapter 159. Xiao Qing was watching from the side. She noticed that the tree seemed to be moving, but when she looked carefully, she realized that it was not the tree that was moving, but the leaves. There were many moths behind the leaves, and their wings were bigger than ordinary moths. They had pink scales, and when they spread their wings, the pink scales would fall down. Whoever it fell on would be paralyzed, and the scorpion tails would pierce into their bodies, turning them into pus and blood. Even those who had opened up their energy shields could not escape. When the scales fell on their shields, the shields would slowly melt, and in the end, they would be paralyzed and poisoned to death. Fortunately, Mao the Third reacted quickly. He waved his hand, and a whirling wind blade rolled up a bunch of moths. The pink scales and broken wings fell down. These moths did not have any defensive abilities, and were quickly killed. After killing all the moths, it was much easier to kill the scorpions. Mao the Third was harassed by the vines, and he could not help but condense a meter-long wind blade and cut it at the tree. The tree was immediately cut in half, and red liquid flowed out like blood. Not to mention Xiao Qing, even the more knowledgeable Yan Qiue was shocked. There was really a tree that could bleed. There was a Fergana horse among horses, but could there be a Fergana tree among trees? When the tree was cut down, the vines immediately went crazy, and several paranormals who had opened their energy shields were directly sent flying. One of the paranormals was very unlucky. His energy shield was directly shattered, and the moment he fell into the river, a crocodile opened its mouth and swallowed the meat pie that fell from the sky. The other paranormals were quite lucky. Although they were sent flying, they landed in a relatively safe place. Other than a few scratches from the mutated weeds nearby, they did not suffer any other injuries. The only one left was Third Bro Mao. Third Bro Mao's entire body was covered in wounds caused by the vines. He was determined. He didn't care if his ability would be overdrawn. He raised both his hands and used a big move. The wind blade was like a huge moon. It directly cleared the remaining scorpions and cut down the big tree. The 10-meter-tall tree suddenly collapsed, and the green vines fell to the ground. Blood-like liquid flowed out. Mao the Third was also lying on the ground, exhausted. He gasped for breath for a while, and then shouted, "Lu Zi, go and pick the fruit." After a long time, no one answered. Mao the Third was a little angry. "Lu Zi, I'm calling you." Before he finished his words, he was stunned, because Lu Zi's head was no longer on his neck. Not only Lu Zi, but the other paranormals who survived were even more miserable, because they were all killed by Yan Qiue. They were all squeezed into a ball by the compressed air. Lu Zi died relatively quickly. Shao Qing was still wiping the knife at the moment. Mao the Third's eyes were red. "You!" Shao Qing put the shiny knife back into the sheath and sneered. "What did we do? Didn't I just kidnap you and ask you to lead the way? How can you be so cruel?" Mao the Third could not get up for a while. He gritted his teeth and said, "Well, after all, I am a cruel person." Shao Qing smiled. Mao the Third suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart, and in the next second, he was already dead. Before he died, Mao the Third finally understood that his brothers who died in the accident were all killed by Shao Qing and Lu Zi. Tender sprouts slowly drilled out of Mao the Third's dead body. Yan Qiue took the energy nuclei of the paranormals and kindly piled them together. There was a saying, "Don't ask to be born in the same year and month, but die in the same year and month. Don't ask to be born in the same bed, but die in the same coffin." He was just helping others. Wait, something was wrong. Chapter 160. It's better to strike first. Shao Qing sighed and went forward to pick the fruit. She was very curious about this fruit. Something that made Mao Laosan and his gang risk their lives to get their hands on shouldn't be too bad. At this moment, Yan Qiue had already found a bottle to collect the sap that flowed out of the tree. The two of them worked together and there was a sense of tacit understanding. Just as Shao Qing touched the fruit, a giant python came out of the river. If the python that she and Xiao Imo had encountered before was as thick as a water bucket, then this one was a little thicker than a water jar. She didn't know how long it had lived for it to be so long, but Shao Qing knew that this thing was coming for them. Shao Qing made a prompt decision and directly pulled the dark green vine from the tree, stuffed it into her space, then picked up Yan Qiue and ran. What a joke, how could such a long thing be worse than the previous one? If the two of them were injured and others took advantage of them on the way back, it wouldn't be fun. Originally, Shao Qing thought that after she and Yan Qiue ran for a while, the giant python would give up. After all, almost all animals had their own territory, especially this kind of big guy. It rarely left its territory and even hunted in its own territory. Of course, the terrifying existence of marching ants was an exception. However, this giant python had already chased them for almost 10 miles and didn't have the slightest intention of giving up. Shao Qing was a little annoyed. She was still holding Yan Qiue in her arms. The vine that we snatched might be something good. This giant python has probably been eyeing it for a long time. It's just that there are too many scorpions and moths guarding it, so it didn't make a move. In the end, the two of us got it, so it's chasing us relentlessly. Yan Qiue analyzed, in this situation, we can either run out of the forest or fight it out with it. It's probably impossible to stop it from chasing us. Shao Qing nodded and instantly reached a tacit understanding with Yan Qiue. She turned around and directly threw Yan Qiue out. While Yan Qiue was in midair, he had already adjusted his posture. When he landed, he happened to be on top of the python's head. He held a dagger in his hand and steadily, accurately, and viciously stabbed towards the python's eyes. The python suddenly lowered its head. As it swung its body, Yanqiue tilted a little and the dagger fell above the python's eyes, drawing a line of sparks. In the next second, the python began to roll around. Yanqiue clung tightly to the python's scales. He was dizzy from being tossed around. He gritted his teeth and vowed to stay on the python's head, but the python wanted to shake him off. Seeing that it couldn't shake him off, the python slammed its head against a tree. Yanqiue hurriedly jumped, and Shaoqing's vine appeared around his waist. Shaoqing exerted force and pulled him back. A big tree that needed 2 people to wrap their arms around was broken. The big tree fell to the ground, stirring up a cloud of dust. The scales on its body are too strong. When I stabbed it with the dagger, my hand hurt from the shock, but it's fine. Yanqiue was so angry that he cursed. Its weakness should be its eyes or something. Shaoqing was still in the mood to joke while studying it. Its anus should be its weakness too. Yanqiue, let me give it a try. Shaoqing pondered for a moment and then said. Yanqiue immediately pulled her back. I'll go. You have the vine. You can save me at a critical moment. Let me go up. Do you know where its 7 inches are? Can you accurately stab its vital points when it's tossing around? Don't mess around. Shaoqing touched Yanqiue's head. When the python got up dizzily, she jumped up and jumped onto the python's head. Chapter 161. As soon as the python felt that someone was on its head, it hurriedly continued to shake its head. Shaoqing's endurance was better than Yanqiue's. The python soon became dizzy. It twisted its body dizzily and wanted to hit a tree. Shaoqing grabbed its scales, turned over, and reached its chin. The python broke a big tree again. Shaoqing took advantage of its dizziness to stab its eyes. To Shaoqing's surprise, she could only stab the tip of the knife, and then she couldn't stab it anymore. Just as Shaoqing was about to stab it harder, the python writhed in pain and began to roll on the ground in various positions, trying to crush Shaoqing into meat paste. Yanqiue opened his eyes this time. He saw that Shaoqing followed the python's rhythm and kept changing her position on the python's body. The python rolled on the ground with its face covered in dust, but it couldn't press down on Shaoqing. It was completely angry. All the scales on its body suddenly opened, like sharp knives. Shaoqing was caught off guard. Her hands and waist were cut several times. When the python rolled again, she couldn't jump on the python's body unscrupulously, because she could only grab the scales. But as long as she grabbed the scales, her hands would be injured. Shaoqing had no choice but to kick the python's body. She somersaulted to the ground and then quickly returned to Yanqiue's side. Yanqiue's eyes were red. It didn't matter if he was injured, but that thing hurt Shaoqing. It hurt Shaoqing in front of him. Don't be impulsive. Shaoqing grabbed Yanqiue. Take a few steps back. Go to a place where the trees are denser. It won't be as flexible there. Yanqiue suppressed his anger and followed Shaoqing to a denser place. Sure enough, the python didn't give up and chased after them. As everyone knew, pythons were rarely poisonous. They relied on their huge bodies to strangle their prey and then swallow it. This one should be no exception. Its attack method had always been collision. For Shaoqing and Yanqiue, who were more flexible, there was no danger at all. If it wasn't for its speed, it would be easy to shake it off. Shaoqing threw Yanqiue onto a tree. She kicked the trunk, then jumped and landed on the python's head again. The military knife in her hand stabbed the python's eyes for the second time. Shaoqing's technique was extremely accurate. Even when she was jumping, even when the snake's head was constantly shaking, she was still able to stab steadily into the same position as before. This time, she stabbed a little deeper. Once she hit the target, Xiaoqing didn't even bother to retrieve her military knife. She turned around and leaped onto a tree. Yan Qiue immediately used his supernatural ability to squeeze the air around the military knife. His forehead was covered with cold sweat, but the military knife was inserted inch by inch. Soon, it reached the handle. Unfortunately, the military knife was too short to stab the python's brain. Although it blinded one of its eyes and caused great pain, it wasn't fatal. The python rolled on the ground in pain. Countless trees were broken by its tail and body. Xiaoqing quickly jumped from tree to tree with Yan Qiue. The trees behind them fell down one by one, but they couldn't keep up with their jumping speed. We can't. Its snakeskin's defense is too high. Neither of us can break through its defense. If this goes on, we'll exhaust our abilities, and it won't die, Xiaoqing said very calmly. Yan Qiue's mind was twisted. He couldn't help but ask, are we really going to attack its anus? Xiaoqing was speechless. What a joke. Let's observe it a little longer. Xiaoqing didn't give up and released vines to bind the python's body. However, as she expected, the thorns on the vines couldn't pierce the python's body at all. The python was so strong that it broke free with a struggle. She released daughter, which successfully entered the python's body. However, as soon as it entered, it was corroded by a strange energy. Needless to say, there was the man-eating flower and the autumn flower. Right, the autumn flower. Xiaoqing's eyes lit up. After subduing the plant, she released it for the first time. The autumn flower exuded a comfortable fragrance. It could increase the combat power of allies. Although it wasn't as good as the invincible pill, it didn't have any side effects. Moreover, it would be upgraded with Xiaoqing's level. In addition, the autumn flower also exuded a fragrance that made people feel weak. Although they didn't know if it was effective against snakes, they had to try. As soon as the autumn flower was released, the python's eyes lit up. It rushed over, probably wanting to eat the autumn flower. However, just as it was about to get close, its speed became slower and slower. Finally, it collapsed on the ground. It works. Xiaoqing's eyes lit up. She tentatively walked forward and pulled out the military knife. Although the python wailed in pain, it didn't have the strength to move. The two walked around the python and stabbed it several times with all their strength, including the 7 inches of the python's body. Then, they found that they couldn't even break the skin. The scales at the 7 inches were fine. They could stab it, but it wouldn't kill it. The key was its eyes. Xiaoqing stood there and gestured twice. The military knife was too short. No matter how she stabbed, she couldn't stab the python's eyes. She poked the python twice tentatively, causing it to howl. However, even if she poked its eyeballs, she couldn't kill it. Xiaoqing evilly poked the python's other eye and blinded it. This way, as a blind snake, it shouldn't be dangerous. After stabbing it blind, even if they couldn't kill it, they could leave. How could they chase a blind snake? Get out of the way. Yan Qiue suddenly shouted in panic and was about to rush over. Xiaoqing was stunned. It was too late. The python that couldn't move suddenly opened its mouth and spat out its blood-red tongue, swallowing her. Xiaoqing forgot that snakes didn't rely on their eyes to hunt. They relied on their tongue, which was their tongue. Chapter 162. At that moment, Yan Qiue felt that if Xiaoqing really died, then he would accompany her. Although he couldn't be her husband when she was alive, he could at least share the same coffin as her when she died. The air around the snake was suddenly squeezed, and Yan Qiue was desperately releasing her power. In the end, one could even see that the space around the big python was being squeezed to the point of instability, and tiny space cracks appeared around it. Correspondingly, Yan Qiue's face was getting paler and paler, and blood was quietly dripping from the corner of his mouth. He had already done his best, and was even overdrawing his ability. If this continued, there would only be one result, and that was that the crystal core would shatter. Naturally, he wouldn't be able to survive. Just as Yan Qiue was about to die together with the python, he suddenly saw a protrusion grow on the python's head. That protrusion grew taller and taller, and finally, with a poof, a large hole opened up in the python's head. Xiaoqing, who was covered in blood, crawled out of the hole with some difficulty. At this moment, her hair and body were covered in the python's flesh and sticky transparent liquid. She looked like she had crawled out of hell. Xiaoqing exerted her strength and pulled out her foot that was stuck in the hole. Before she could stand firm, Yan Qiue rushed over. She was still covered in dirty things, but Yan Qiue didn't mind and hugged her tightly. Xiaoqing coughed and said, "I'm fine." In fact, she did it on purpose. Otherwise, if she didn't know how long Qiu Tang could stun the python, would she dare to stand in front of the python and study it for such a long time? The python's weakness was none other than a few places. Attacking the eyes was useless, attacking the 7 inches was useless, and needless to say, the anus was needless. Only the mouth and stomach were not protected by scales. She couldn't possibly stab the anus with the python's tail, right? After entering the snake's stomach, it was another question whether there would be a chance to get out. Therefore, Xiaoqing chose the most difficult but also the most promising place, the mouth. Snakes like to strangle their prey and swallow them. Their fangs were not used to kill their prey, but to inject poison into their prey. Therefore, when Xiaoqing was swallowed, she did not have to worry about being bitten. She threw out the vines and hung herself on the snake's fangs. Finally, she stabbed the snake's brain with a military knife. She tore open the python's insides with her bare hands and crawled out. The situation was too complicated before, so Xiaoqing didn't have time to discuss it with Yan Qiue. She was also afraid that Yan Qiue wouldn't agree to her taking the risk and insisted on going alone, so she didn't discuss it with her. Xiaoqing couldn't help but comfort Yan Qiue, "It's just a snake. It can't kill me." Yan Qiue put his head on Xiaoqing's shoulder, sighed with relief, and fainted. Xiaoqing lowered her head and saw Yan Qiue's pale face. There was still a trace of crimson on the corners of his lips, but his expression was very peaceful. The wood power was born with the ability to heal. Although it was very weak, it was better than nothing. However, Xiaoqing's recovery ability was too strong, so the little healing ability of the wood power was useless to her. Xiaoqing laid Yan Qiue flat on the ground and used her power to explore Yan Qiue's body. The power in his body was almost exhausted, and only a trace of weak power was slowly circulating in his body. Xiaoqing understood in an instant. Yan Qiue must have thought that she was dead just now, so he tried his best and overdrew his power. Obviously, Yan Qiue didn't want to live. There was a moment of confusion in Xiaoqing's eyes. She had never met such a man, who loved her so much that he was willing to live and die with her. Moreover, they had the most intimate relationship. The relationship between them could no longer be defined simply, but Xiaoqing didn't want to be Yan Qiue's lover. Chapter 163. She probably doted on Yan Qiue like a child, mixed with friendship, kinship, and complicated emotions that she couldn't explain. But now, Xiaoqing couldn't help but feel a little escape. It seemed that she couldn't give Yan Qiue what he wanted. Xiaoqing injected her ability into Yan Qiue's body to repair his injured body while letting her imagination run wild. When Yan Qiue's breathing calmed down, Xiaoqing breathed a sigh of relief. She stood up and dismantled the python. She was very skilled in dismantling the python. It looked like she was handling ingredients in the kitchen. She easily separated the python's skin and meat. The python's skin was so tough that it could be used to make armor or something. Bones and meat actually had many uses. The meat could be eaten, the bones could be used as medicine, and they could be used to make wine. However, Xiaoqing's storage space wasn't big to begin with. Even after leveling up, the space had expanded, but after storing so many things, it couldn't hold the python at all. So she took a few pieces of meat, dug out the crystal nucleus, kept the skin, and threw the rest aside. After dealing with the python, Xiaoqing took Yan Qiue to the river. Her body was sticky and covered with dried blood. If she didn't wash it, it would stick. So when Yan Qiue woke up, he saw Xiaoqing sitting cross-legged by the river, combing her long hair. Her long black hair was still dripping with water, and Yan Qiue could only see her white neck. Yan Qiue moved his body and then fell back again. He had overdrawn too much, and his body couldn't take it anymore. His various functions were about to stop working. Xiaoqing combed her wet hair and said, "You can't move your body. Recover slowly. When we leave the forest, you should be almost recovered. Don't try to show off these few days. Be good and let me carry you." Yan Qiue didn't say anything. He was a little angry. He was angry at Xiaoqing for acting on her own, but he didn't want to argue with Xiaoqing, so he sulked alone. Xiaoqing didn't say anything. She carried him on her back. When her wet hair hung down, it even rubbed against Yan Qiue. It was cool. Xiaoqing didn't know how to coax people, and she didn't know how to coax people. They didn't talk all the way until it was time to eat. They ate snake meat. Xiaoqing roasted the meat and brushed it with seasoning. It smelled delicious. She cut the snake meat into pieces and handed them to Yan Qiue. As soon as Yan Qiue looked up, she saw Xiaoqing, who was usually very cold, but at this moment, there was gentleness in her eyes. The anger in her heart immediately dissipated. He slowly picked up a piece and bit it fiercely. After he was full, he lay in Xiaoqing's arms. Yan Qiue really wanted to tell Xiaoqing not to take any more risks in the future. Even if there was something dangerous, she should inform him in advance. He was really worried, so worried that he was going to die. But at this moment, he didn't know what to say. What was his relationship with Xiaoqing? Was he qualified to say this? Xiaoqing seemed to see through his thoughts. She carried him on her back and said softly, "I won't do it in the future. Won't take risks, or won't take risks privately." Yan Qiue didn't ask. He held Xiaoqing's neck tightly. His heart was already stable. Xiaoqing heard no response from behind, so she couldn't help but turn her head. It didn't matter when she turned her head, but when Yan Qiue raised his head, the two of them met eyes. Not only did they meet eyes, but also their lips. Xiaoqing was stunned at that time. What was that soft and a little warm? Yan Qiue was very good at seizing the opportunity. He was able to lean forward and kiss Xiaoqing's lips. The soft tip of his tongue stretched out and swept across Xiaoqing's teeth tentatively. Chapter 164. There was also a faint meaty aroma mixed with an indescribable aroma. Xiaoqing's sense of taste was weak, but she could still feel a faint aroma. She didn't know if it came from the meat Yan Qiue had eaten or the saliva in his mouth, but it seeped through the gaps between her teeth and stained the tip of her tongue. Xiaoqing was in a daze. Unknowingly, she opened a gap between her teeth. Yan Qiue's eyes lit up. He pried open Xiaoqing's teeth and swept his tongue inside Xiaoqing's mouth. Xiaoqing, who was stunned for a long time, felt a little dizzy. After a long time, she came back to her senses and turned her head. However, because she moved too fast, she pulled a silver thread, which broke with a snap. At that moment, Xiaoqing's face was as red as the burning clouds in the sky. She staggered and almost bumped into a tree. Then, her face became even redder. She ran back in the direction she came from. Even the cold wind couldn't blow away the blush on her cheeks. At that moment, her mind was not filled with the thought of being taken advantage of, nor was it that Yan Qiue was so bold. It was just that his lips and tongue were so soft. Why did she have such a strange thought? The two walked for 3 days and finally walked out of the jungle for the second time. At this time, Yan Qiue could already move. Running and jumping were not a problem, but his speed was still not good enough. So, Xiaoqing still carried him on her back. The two of them rushed forward in a straight line at lightning speed. After walking for almost a day, Xiaoqing was stunned. She saw a familiar scene. It was the place where the bandits had dug a pit as a trap and almost destroyed their 2 SUVs. Xiaoqing was silent for a long time, and then said, "We are going in the opposite direction." If they kept going forward, they would reach Yanjiang. They were going in the opposite direction of Linchuan Survivor Base. There were 2 options in front of Xiaoqing. One was to go directly to the Jiangbei Survivor Base and see if she could find Air Dai. On the way back, she could change her route and see if they were in the S-City Survivor Base. The second option was to go back to Linchuan Survivor Base first. After dealing with Yan Qiue, he would go to S-City Survivor Base and Jiangbei Survivor Base. Xiaoqing really didn't know how to choose, so she directly threw the problem to Yan Qiue. Yan Qiue was very supportive and said directly, "Let's go to the Jiangbei Survivor Base first. Linchuan is fine. As long as Qiaomo isn't dead, there won't be any chaos. We can go back whenever we want." Xiaoqing breathed a sigh of relief. She directly crossed the mountain pass in front of them and walked forward along the route they had taken last time. When they reached the edge of the city, Xiaoqing specially went to check on the temporary residence she had found for Yan Hanqing and the others. They were no longer there, and the house was very tidy. It didn't look like there had been a battle. They should have all evacuated safely. Xiaoqing breathed a sigh of relief. She directly took Yan Qiue through the city at the fastest speed, and finally arrived at the edge of Yanjiang. Yanjiang was very wide. It was impossible for Xiaoqing to fly across. She could only think of other ways. In the end, she finally saw a boat after walking upstream for a long time. The abandoned metal boat was lying in the grass. It was already a little rusty, but it was just enough for Xiaoqing and Yan Qiue to cross the river. Not far across the river was the Jiangbei Survivor Base. Xiaoqing breathed a sigh of relief, but also a little nervous. She really hoped to see her teammates at the Jiangbei Survivor Base, but she was also afraid that they wouldn't be there. The greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. Yan Qiue could feel Xiaoqing's slightly trembling shoulders. He deliberately distracted Xiaoqing. "Don't you think it's a little frivolous that I didn't bring any gifts?" Chapter 165. Xiaoqing couldn't help but laugh. "It's not like you're meeting your mother-in-law. Why are you being so frivolous?" Yan Qiue widened her eyes. "It's almost like meeting your mother-in-law. What if your teammates don't like me and you decide to abandon me?" Xiaoqing's mood relaxed a lot because of his words. She pondered for a moment, then said, "Then I'll tell them that you're my sugar baby. Then you must be my sugar baby for the rest of your life." Yan Qiue leaned on Xiaoqing's back and chuckled. They didn't put Yan Chiue down until they reached the gate of Jiangbei Survivor Base. Then they walked over together. There were many people at the gate of Jiangbei Survivor Base. They were probably the nearby survivors who came to seek shelter, and there were also ordinary people who came back from the outside. Both of them had to be checked to make sure that they weren't infected by zombies before they were allowed to enter the base. As for the superpowered people, they didn't need to be checked or registered except for the first time when they entered the base. It was the first time that Xiaoqing and Yan Chiue came to Jiangbei Survivor Base, so they lined up at the gate obediently. After all, nothing could be accomplished without rules. The base had set the rules, so they couldn't do anything against the rules just because they had the ability. People like them usually died relatively quickly. The two of them were rather eye-catching in the group. After all, they were a handsome man and a beautiful woman. Moreover, the two of them were dressed neatly and looked very relaxed. They were completely different from the people around them who had escaped from the disaster and were dressed in rags and looked like they were emaciated. Although the line was very long, it was still very fast as long as no one cut in line. It was hard to say if someone cut in line. Just as Xiaoqing was about to reach the front of the line, several well-dressed men came over. From the gate of Jiangbei Survivor Base came a good-looking young man who exuded a sense of licentiousness. As soon as the men saw the young man, they greeted him, "Brother Hao. Brother Hao, you're finally here. We've been waiting for you for a long time." The young man called Brother Hao immediately waved his hand. "What are you waiting for? Come with me." As he spoke, he led a few people in front of Xiaoqing and Yan Chiue and directly cut the queue. Cutting the queue was actually not a big deal. With Xiaoqing's character, she would definitely not fuss over such a small matter. That person shouldn't have pushed Yan Chiue, and he shouldn't have used so much strength. Before Yan Chiue met Xiaoqing, he was a devil incarnate. His temper didn't need much, but after meeting Xiaoqing, Yan Chiue restrained himself a lot. At least, he wouldn't care about such trivial things. But that person shouldn't have stared at Xiaoqing after pushing him away. The way he looked at Xiaoqing was as if he wanted to strip off her clothes. Therefore, this seemingly arrogant Brother Hao offended both Xiaoqing and Yan Chiue as soon as he came up. He didn't know it himself, but he was almost drooling when he looked at Xiaoqing. 1 word, good. 2 words, good. 3 words, I want to have sex with you. Brother Hao thought that he had seen a lot of beautiful women. For example, the beautiful woman next to his eldest brother was a hot girl with big breasts and round buttocks. But compared with Xiaoqing, that beautiful hot girl was full of prostitutes in an instant. Besides, the number one beauty in their base was not only not beautiful, but also had a little unique charm of a young woman. But she was still a little inferior to Xiaoqing. It was the first time that Brother Hao had seen such a beautiful woman. He made a pose that he thought was very handsome, took out a box of Zhonghua cigarettes, and smoked a cigarette. Immediately, a man with good eyesight came up to light the cigarette for him. Brother Hao thought that he was very stylish. Whether it was the Zhonghua cigarette in his hand, the way he held the cigarette, or even his greasy bangs, he was so handsome that no one could compare with him. However, in Xiaoqing's eyes, he was a fool with a brain damage index of more than 101. She gave him one more point to make him proud. "Sister, where are you from?" Brother Hao came over and said, "Are you going to live in Jiangbei Survivor Base for a long time, or are you looking for someone?" Xiaoqing didn't say anything. She was thinking that if she beat up the man in front of her at the gate of Jiangbei Survivor Base, wouldn't it be too disrespectful to Meng Shen and the others? Yan Chiue made an excuse. "Can you move aside? You are blocking the door." Yan Chiue's appearance was good-looking, but it was also bad-looking that he was feminine. Brother Hao didn't take Yan Chiue seriously at all. He made a gesture of shaking the cigarette butt, and then said, "Boy, how dare you talk to me like that? Do you know who I am? Do you know where this is? This is Jiangbei Survivor Base. How dare you be so arrogant at the gate of our base? You are really something. Yan Qiyu clenched his fists tightly, not because he was angry, but because he had to suppress his anger. What if he killed this man and caused trouble for Xiaoqing? They came here today to look for someone, not to fight. The more Yan Qiyu restrained himself, the more the man was convinced that Yan Qiyu was not capable, and the more arrogant he became. He sneered and said, "Do you believe that I will let you crawl out of Jiangbei Survivor Base? Boy, I will teach you a lesson today. If you are not capable, you should shrink your head, or it will be easy for people to break your neck." At that moment, Yan Qiyu's murderous aura was so strong that it almost materialized. Brother Hao shivered and murmured, "Is the wind blowing? Why is it a little cold? What you just said is really right. If you are not capable, you should shrink your head, or it will be easy for people to break your neck." Xiaoqing sneered. Her eyes were clear, and she looked beautiful no matter how she smiled, including sneering. Brother Hao was stunned and almost drooled. He said proudly, "See, all the beauties agree with me." However, Xiaoqing looked at him as if she was looking at a dead man. Chapter 166. At that moment, Xiaoqing really wanted to take action. However, when she was about to do so, a man appeared in her sight. The man was none other than Yan Pingshan. Yan Pingshan sat in the off-road vehicle with no expression on his face. He looked very serious. As soon as he came out, Brother Hao and the others hurriedly made way for him. Everyone looked at him with awe. Brother Hao pulled Xiaoqing and said to Xiaoqing, "He's the leader of our base. Don't offend him." Without saying anything, Xiaoqing stood in the only way of the off-road vehicle. Brother Hao was so scared that he peed his pants. He didn't expect Xiaoqing to be such a brave person. The off-road vehicle immediately stopped. The driver stuck his head out and scolded, "Are you crazy?" Then the driver was pressed on the steering wheel by Yan Pingshan. He jumped out of the car with surprise. "Aching! Is that you?" Xiaoqing nodded and said, "Where's Dai? Where's my son? Is he with you? Let's go in and talk." Yan Pingshan hesitated and said. The people behind him immediately asked, "Are we going to?" Before he finished, Yan Pingshan shouted, "Let's go. Let's go back." However, when facing Xiaoqing, he was extraordinarily pleasant. "I'll go and call Mengshin. Let's sit down and talk for a while." Xiaoqing took Yan Qiyu and followed Yan Pingshan into the house. Brother Hao, who was trying to flirt with Xiaoqing, was speechless. Mengshin was a little thin, but he couldn't hide the joy on his face. When he heard the news about Yan Pingshan, he left everything in his hands and rushed over. "Fortunately, you're fine." Yan Qiyu became alert. Xiaoqing was actually a very slow person. She couldn't feel it, but Yan Qiyu could clearly feel that the man in front of her was interested in Xiaoqing. Yan Qiyu quickly hugged Xiaoqing's arm and said with a smile, "Qing, won't you introduce him to me?" Xiaoqing didn't understand what Yan Qiyu was thinking. She said very seriously, "This is Yan Pingshan, and this is Mengshin. They are both my friends." After saying that, she pointed at Yan Qiyu. "Previously, I fell into Yan River, and it was Qiyu who saved me." "Qiyu, how intimate." Mengshin narrowed his eyes and suddenly smiled. "Qing, are you planning to settle down in Jiangbei Survivor Base this time? I'm here to see if you guys got out safely, and are Dai and the others in the Jiangbei Survivor Base now?" Xiaoqing frowned and asked in a low voice. Mengshin shook his head and said, "At that time, you fell into the water, and Dai jumped in right after you. Pingsheng and I sent people to search along Yan River, but we couldn't find you too. Yan Hanqing and the others stayed in the Jiangbei survivor base for a few days. They wanted to wait for you to come back, but you didn't come back. They went back with Yan Ruru and said that they would go back to find you. Yan Pingshan immediately said, they said that they would search along Yan River, one by one. That way, they would be able to find you. Xiao Qing and Yan Hanqing looked at each other and felt a little annoyed. If Yan Hanqing and the others went along Yan River, they should have arrived at Linchuan survivor base by now. Yan Hanqing and the others were definitely fine. Xiao Qing was most worried about Dai. She wasn't worried that something would happen to Dai in the river. Xiao Qing was worried that after he came ashore, he would meet people with bad intentions who would use him, or his identity would be exposed. Xiao Qing made a prompt decision. If that's the case, I will go and find them now. Yan Pingshan quickly said, don't you want to stay for a few more days? It's not easy to see you. Yan Pingshan winked at Mengshin. He could see clearly that Mengshin liked Xiao Qing. If Xiao Qing left now, he didn't know when they would meet again. Chapter 167. Yan Pingshan naturally wanted to create an opportunity for Mengshin. No, I'm really worried about them, Xiao Qing shook her head and said softly, especially Dai. His identity is too sensitive. Mengshin lowered his head and said after a while, you go quickly. It's more important to meet up with your teammates. We have plenty of time to catch up later. Xiao Qing nodded. She didn't stay for a moment and immediately prepared to leave. Before she left, Yan Pingshan gave her a lot of things, including food and necessities. Xiao Qing didn't refuse and took all of them. After they walked out of Jiangbei survivor base, Yan Qiue was relieved. There were indeed many people who coveted Xiao Qing. Fortunately, he acted quickly, unlike Meng Xin, who was hesitant. It was destined that he couldn't win against him. After Xiao Qing left, Yan Pingshan jumped and said, why can't you be enlightened? Now that you let Xiao Qing go, do you still have a chance in the future? Meng Shen was depressed for a moment, but he quickly glanced at Yan Pingshan and said, it's not you who is looking for a wife. Why are you jumping? He knew very well that he couldn't keep Xiao Qing. Xiao Qing would definitely go to Dai. Instead of annoying Xiao Qing, it was better to be decisive and let her go. If they were fated to meet again, they would meet again. After Xiao Qing left Jiangbei survivor base, she didn't want to go back to S City. She took Yan Pingshan and ran along the Yan River. They drove an off-road car that Yan Pingshan gave them. When they passed by a survivor base, Xiao Qing would go in and ask if Yan Hanqing and the others had been there. There were many survivor bases. They met at least 7 or 8 along the way, big and small. They didn't see Yan Hanqing and the others until they reached Linchuan survivor base. Xiao Qing knew that this matter couldn't be rushed, so she didn't say much. She just said, since we are going back to Linchuan survivor base, let's go back first and let Xiao Mo feel at ease. We can also see if they have arrived at Linchuan. Yan Qiyu nodded. In fact, he didn't want Xiao Qing to find her teammates. Now they were alone. Once they found Xiao Qing's teammates, it would be a world of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people. He wouldn't be able to monopolize Xiao Qing anymore. Therefore, Yan Qiyu hoped that Xiao Qing couldn't find her teammates, so he could accompany her to find them. At the same time, he hoped that Xiao Qing could find them, because he didn't want to see Xiao Qing so anxious. It was like ice and fire. Yan Qiyu swiped his ID card and successfully entered Linchuan survivor base. Immediately, someone went to inform Xiao Mo that Yan Qiyu was back. After Xiao Mo returned to the base, the first thing he did was to send 10 teams of paranormals to find Yan Qiue. It could be seen how important Yan Qiue was in Xiao Mo's heart. Yan Qiue threw the car directly to the guard, then walked inside with Xiao Qing. They needed to go back to Yan Qiue's house first and pack up a little. They estimated that Xiao Mo would come at this time. They told Xiao Mo that they were going to take a look around the base, then they could continue to look for Yan Hanqing and the others. However, the plan couldn't keep up with the changes. When the two were crossing the square to go home, they saw several familiar figures. The corners of Xiao Qing's eyes immediately moistened, because those figures were none other than Yan Hanqing and the others. Xiao Qing didn't say anything and walked over, ready to greet Yan Hanqing and the others. When she got closer, she found that there were several people standing in front of Yan Hanqing, and the leader was none other than Qiao Yu. Qiao Yu's face was gloomy, and he was holding a very familiar rabbit in his hand. He was talking to Yan Hanqing and the others. Animals are rude because they are animals. Are you animals too? Chapter 168. Little Bun clenched his fists and shouted at Qiao Yu, "Give Yi back to me." Qiao Yu held the rabbit and looked it up and down. Then, she sneered, "You want it?" Then, before Little Bun could say anything, Qiao Yu grabbed one of the rabbit's ears and tore it off. Yi was in so much pain that it kicked its legs. Just as Qiao Yu was about to tear off the second ear, Little Bun suddenly ran over and jumped. He grabbed Qiao Yu's wrist and bit it. Qiao Yu swung her hand in pain and threw Little Bun away. Fortunately, Yan Hanqing was quick enough to catch Little Bun. He said with a cold face, "Aren't you going a little overboard?" Qiao Yu immediately scolded, "First, your rabbit bumped into me, then this little bastard bit me. How am I going overboard? I'll tell you today. Either you kneel down, kowtow to me, and shout 'I'm wrong' 3 times, or ha, this little bastard, I'll skin him alive." As she spoke, Qiao Yu reached out to grab Little Bun. Yan Hanqing's face immediately turned cold. He took a step back and dodged Qiao Yu's hand. Then, he said stiffly, "You're the one who's being unreasonable. If you do this again, I won't be polite anymore. Oh. I'll show you how unreasonable I am today." Qiao Yu was already angry because of what happened with Yan Qiue last time. Now, her anger overflowed even more. It was fine if Yan Qiue didn't treat her nicely. Her brother wouldn't allow her to do anything to Yan Qiue. But who were these people? How dare they be arrogant in front of her? Qiao Yu immediately attacked. She was a wind ability user. Although her ability wasn't high, it was still at level 2. She viciously slashed a wind blade at Little Bun's neck. Not to mention Yan Hanqing, even Gu Chuan and his sister's faces turned ugly. The first one to make a move was Gu Panpan. She stretched her arm out in front of Yan Hanqing, and with a clench of her hand, she shattered the wind blade. Disregarding everything else, Gu Panpan was now a high-rank 3 metahuman. She was not someone that Qiao Yu, who had not experienced any battles and was only a metahuman that relied on crystal cores, could compare to. However, as soon as Qiao Yu made a move, her bodyguards also made a move. These people didn't dare to let anything happen to Qiao Yu. Qiao Yu was Qiao Mo's younger sister. If something happened to Qiao Yu, they wouldn't be able to stay in Linchuan Survivor Base anymore. The 4 bodyguards aimed at Yan Hanqing in unison. They could tell that the Little Bun was the weakness of Yan Hanqing and the others. Like master, like bodyguards. Every move they made was ruthless. Against a child, all of them were deadly moves. However, Gu Panpan and the others didn't make a move. Countless vines instantly formed a high wall in front of Yan Hanqing. No one's attack could penetrate this wall. The vines were too familiar. They looked to the side in surprise. Xiaoqing descended from the sky and kicked one of the bodyguard's buttocks. In the next second, countless vines flew forward and grabbed the bodyguard's limbs, including his neck. Xiaoqing jumped up and kneed his spine. With a cracking sound, the man's spine broke. Then, Xiaoqing threw him aside like a piece of trash. If a person's spine was broken, they could only be paralyzed in bed for the rest of their life. Especially in this post-apocalyptic world, they might as well die. Xiaoqing's move was too ruthless. The remaining 3 bodyguards looked at each other and didn't dare to make a move. They didn't dare to make a move, but Xiaoqing did. She raised her hand and the vines flew out like snakes. The 3 bodyguards didn't dare to resist and retreated quickly. Chapter 169. Qiao Yu originally wanted to scold these cowardly bodyguards, but then she saw Yan Qiue walking over. Her face immediately turned pale, and she wanted to squat at the side and vomit. The trauma from last time was still vivid in her mind, and she didn't dare to go against Yan Qiue again. "Why are you running?" Xiaoqing sneered. She clenched her fist, and one of the bodyguards immediately knelt on the ground. Countless sprouts emerged from his body, tearing through his clothes and swaying in the wind. Xiaoqing chose the cruelest method, which was to let the daughter grow out of his body and use its roots to fill his organs. This way of dying was the slowest and most painful way. However, Xiaoqing felt that it wasn't enough because these people in front of her actually attacked Little Bun. That was her life, and it was more important than her own. If anyone attacked Little Bun, it would be worse than taking her life. Then, they couldn't blame her for being ruthless. That person's death frightened the remaining 2 bodyguards. The 2 of them broke into a run, no longer caring about Qiao Yu and Qiao Buyu. Although they wouldn't be able to protect Qiao Yu and would be punished by Qiao Mo, if they didn't run now, their lives would be lost here. However, they still couldn't escape because Gu Chuan and Yan Hanqing attacked at the same time. One of them had an ice spike pierce through his heart, while the other had a lightning bolt pierce through his head. Their deaths were tragic, but at least they didn't have to suffer as much as their 2 colleagues. "Miss Qiao, where do you want to go?" Yan Qiue asked with a smile. Qiao Yu's legs were already weak. She threw away Ye in her hands. Although her face was pale, there was at least some color in her face. "Yan Qiue, don't forget that my brother is Qiao Mo," she said fiercely. What kind of person was Yan Qiue? He did as he pleased. He probably really dared to kill her. Little Bun ran out from Yan Hanqing's arms and went to pick up the dying Ye. Ye was missing an ear and was bleeding profusely. Little Bun's heart ached. He had just picked up Ye when Qiao Yu picked her up. Qiao Yu could tell that Xiaoqing cared about the Little Bun, while Yan Qiue cared about Xiaoqing. As long as the Little Bun was in her hands, Yan Qiue wouldn't dare to do anything to her. That way, as long as she could stall until Qiao Mo arrived, she would be safe. "Don't come over. Otherwise, my hands will tremble." Qiao Yu choked Little Bun's neck and suddenly became tough. Xiaoqing's aura instantly turned so cold that it didn't seem like a living person. Previously, she hadn't intended to kill Qiao Yu, because no matter what, she had to think about Yan Qiue. Killing a few lackeys as a warning to Qiao Yu was enough. But now, she really wanted to kill Qiao Yu. No one had ever dared to use the Little Bun to threaten her. The Little Bun was her life, and Qiao Yu had really touched her bottom line. Just kill her. Qiao Mo won't dare to do anything. Yan Qiue saw Xiaoqing's expression clearly. He knew Xiaoqing's temper. If he hadn't said this in advance, Xiaoqing would definitely kill Qiao Yu first and then cut ties with him so that he wouldn't be implicated. How could Yan Qiue tolerate Xiao Qing cutting ties with him just because of Qiao Yu? Who was Qiao Yu? Was she worth the enmity between him and Xiao Qing because of her? She wasn't worthy. If it weren't for the fact that he hadn't fully recovered and couldn't use his ability as he pleased, he would definitely kill Qiao Yu first. He had tolerated Qiao Yu for a long time. Previously, he just didn't want to change places. At least Linchuan Survivor Base was more stable and suitable for experiments, so he didn't want to offend Xiao Mo and didn't make a move on Qiao Yu. He didn't expect that his momentary tolerance would give Qiao Yu the illusion that he didn't dare to provoke her. At this moment, she even wanted to climb over his head. Now that he liked Xiao Qing, he already planned to follow wherever Xiao Qing went. He didn't care whether he would offend Xiao Mo or not. Hearing Yan Qiue's words, Xiao Qing swallowed the words she was about to say and looked directly at Qiao Yu. Qiao Yu was so scared that she trembled. She couldn't help but tighten her grip on the little bun. She was so nervous that she didn't notice that the child in her hand didn't seem to be suffocating at all. A pair of yin-yang eyes looked at her calmly and didn't forget to hug the bunny in his arms tightly. Xiao Qing saw very clearly that the little bun would be fine for a while. She slowly approached Qiao Yu. Qiao Yu had touched her bottom line, so she wouldn't let her die so easily. Your son is in my hands. What are you trying to do? Don't come any closer. Qiao Yu said in a panic. As she spoke, Qiao Yu was still backing away. She didn't look like someone who was threatening others at all. Instead, she looked like someone who was being threatened. Qiao Yu was panicking, but Xiao Qing was very calm. She secretly directed the vines to circle around Qiao Yu. Although she was prepared to kill Qiao Yu, that was on the basis that she wanted to save the little bun. Otherwise, she wouldn't do it. Just stand there. If you come any closer, I won't be polite. Before Qiao Yu could finish speaking, Xiao Qing stopped in her tracks. A lush plant bloomed under her feet, and a light fragrance slowly drifted over. Although Qiao Yu was an idiot, she had a powerful brother, so she naturally had some knowledge. She immediately understood that the plant under Xiao Qing's feet was definitely not simple. Put it away. Xiao Qing obediently put away the qiutang. Because Qiao Yu had already been hit, she swayed weakly and hurriedly bit her lips. Then, she felt a pain in her ankle. When she looked down, she saw that the vines had already bound her feet. Qiao Yu was ruthless and prepared to kill the little bun. Even a cornered dog would jump over a wall. However, her hands were getting weaker and weaker. In the end, she loosened her grip and the little bun fell safely to the ground. Xiao Qing walked over with her military knife. A voice came from afar. Have mercy. Xiao Qing didn't need to look to know that it was Qiao Mo. However, she had no intention of showing mercy. The military knife quickly stabbed down. Chapter 170. Xiao Qing had no intention of stopping. She was determined to take Qiao Yu's life. Let alone Qiao Mo, even if the Heavenly King came, she would kill her first before speaking. However, Xiao Qing couldn't kill Qiao Yu in the end because before Xiao Qing could do anything, Qiao Yu was already living a life worse than death. Little Bun squatted on the ground, hugging Yiya with one hand and Qiao Yu's ankle with the other. Green energy could be seen flowing out of Qiao Yu's body. In just a few seconds, Qiao Yu turned into a dried corpse. Her hair was yellow, and she was all skin and bones. Her eyes were bulging, and she looked particularly terrifying. Little Bun jumped into Xiao Qing's arms and complained first, "So ugly, Mommy. Baby is scared." Xiao Qing smiled and patted Little Bun's head. She covered his eyes and said, "Baby is not scared." After comforting Little Bun, the first thing Xiao Qing did was to call her teammates over. They were ready to break out of the encirclement at any time. She was now an intermediate level 4. After her body was repaired, she gained the ability to control space. Although her control over space wasn't strong and couldn't compare to the Zombie King, with this ability and her wood ability, it would be easy for her to break out of the encirclement. Xiao Mo's expression was a little ugly. He was one step too late. Xiao Yu couldn't be more dead at this moment. The person who killed her was obviously Xiao Qing's group. Surprisingly, the first thing Xiao Mo said when he came over wasn't anger or accusation. His tone was very calm, and it didn't sound like it was his sister who died in front of him at all. It sounded more like an unrelated person. "Chiyue, are you preparing to leave?" Yan Chiyue nodded. The agreement was very clear. "I will leave when I want to. You should still remember this, right?" Xiao Mo pondered for a moment and continued to ask, "You're not coming back?" "I don't know." Yan Chiyue's meaning was very clear. He followed Xiao Qing. Wherever Xiao Qing went, he would go. If Xiao Qing didn't come back, he definitely wouldn't come back. Xiao Mo waved his hand, and someone immediately came to carry Xiao Yu's body away. "The one who died is my sister. I should have the right to know the reason behind her death." Yan Chiyue glanced at Xiao Qing and briefly recounted what had just happened. It was nothing more than Xiao Yu courting death. If she wasn't Xiao Mo's sister, she would have probably died 1,000 times over. Xiao Mo nodded. "I believe you. It's Xiao Yu's fault, so I won't do anything about it. Are you all planning to stay here for a few days, or are you leaving now?" At this point, Xiao Qing couldn't help but take another look at him. How magnanimous, how shrewd, and how cold was his personality to be able to do such a thing. His sister was dead, but not only did he not have any intention of taking revenge on the person who killed her, he could even be so amiable. Xiao Qing felt a little cold. With such a temperament, even if he didn't have any abilities, he would still be able to live well in this post-apocalyptic world. Xiao Qing naturally didn't have anything to prepare. She looked at Yan Chiyue, and Yan Chiyue quickly said, "I'll go back and pack my things." He had a lot of experimental equipment and results, and they were still at his place. It was fine if he lost his money, but these things couldn't be lost. "I'll accompany Chiyue to pack some things. You all can leave the city first." Xiao Qing was still a little worried about Xiao Mo. How could anyone go to this extent? It was possible that Xiao Mo was deliberately putting on an act to make them lower their guard. "Feel free to do as you wish. I'll go and deal with my sister's body first." Xiao Mo smiled and left. After walking a distance, the person following him couldn't help but ask, "Are you really not going to take revenge for eldest miss?" Chapter 171. Xiao Mo didn't say anything, but he was determined to replace her. Xiao Yu was his sister, but they had the same father but different mothers. After his mother died, his father married a stepmother, who gave birth to Xiao Yu. His father died at the beginning of the apocalypse, and his stepmother was killed by Xiao Mo himself. He found dozens of men to kill his stepmother in a small warehouse. In fact, in the end, his stepmother was still breathing. Xiao Mo opened the door and took a look. The charming young woman was already on the verge of death, so he had his men throw his stepmother into the pile of zombies. The reason was that his stepmother had hired people to kill him twice. Xiao Yu didn't know about this. Xiao Mo didn't keep Xiao Yu because of family ties, but purely for fun. He had killed his stepmother with his own hands, but her daughter still called him brother sweetly and even took the initiative to climb into his bed. Xiao Mo didn't refuse and enjoyed this young body. Even if Xiao Yu was his sister and half of their blood flowed in their bodies, Xiao Mo didn't refuse. Therefore, even if Xiao Qing killed Xiao Yu, the first thing on Xiao Mo's mind wasn't revenge, but how to keep Yan Qiue, and how to reap the greatest benefits when Yan Qiue was determined to leave. He was such a person, otherwise why would he sleep with his own sister? Yan Hanqing and the others didn't leave. They were also worried that Xiao Mo would play dirty tricks, so they accompanied Yan Qiue to pack up. The experimental equipment was placed in Xiao Qing's space, as well as his little treasury. After packing up, Yan Qiue didn't even bother to say goodbye to Xiao Mo, and the few of them left. Yan Qiue thought that he was ruthless, but not as ruthless as Xiao Mo. It was better to stay away from such a person. After leaving Linchuan, the few of them discussed and headed in the direction of Jingdu. Jingdu was the largest survivor base in the country, and it was also the place with the most uniform rules, but also the most chaotic. The more people there were, the more information there would be. Maybe there would be news about Dai. Probably because they had been separated for too long, the little bun stuck to Xiao Qing and couldn't be removed, so the driver was replaced by Yan Hanqing. The car was a black family car, given by Xiao Mo before they left. So when they walked out of Linchuan, everyone's expression was very strange. Have you ever seen someone give you a car after killing someone's sister? Xiao Qing sat in the back with the little bun in her arms, and Yi in the little bun's arms. Yi's head was bandaged into a ball with a bow, and it looked like she had 3 years. Yi's head. Once little Baozi was in Xiao Qing's arms, he began to talk endlessly. 8 out of 10 sentences would definitely reach Yi's ears at the end of the sentence. In the end, you're a little girl's SSS, S's 2's. Yi's 2 out of 3 sentences. You don't even say you miss your mother. The little bun immediately pouted and kissed Xiao Qing, firmly and fiercely on Xiao Qing's mouth, and then said in a childish voice, I love mommy the most. Mommy, I miss you, but Yi must be painful. Xiao Qing was angry and amused at the same time. She couldn't help but poke the little bun. You little ingrate. Yan Qiue immediately took the opportunity to interrupt. The baby is so cute. He greeted him with a smile, but the little bun pushed him away. The little bun sneered and shouted, Uncle Qing, someone is seducing mommy. Yan Qiue was confused, and Xiao Qing burst into laughter. She poked the little bun again. Where did you learn these strange words? Seducing mommy. Chapter 172. Yan Hanqing, on the other hand, blushed. It was said that love rivals would get jealous when they met. Although he and Yan Qiue weren't jealous, both of them knew very well that both of them were interested in Xiao Qing, so it would depend on their own abilities. In comparison, Yan Qiue was at a disadvantage, because little Baozi didn't have a good impression of Yan Qiue. When he looked at Yan Qiue, she looked like one of those evil stepmothers in stories. She also looked like a coquettish fox. Of course, the latter adjective came from Gu Ponpon's description of a certain woman. Little Baozi had learned it and used it flexibly. Therefore, little Baozi was thinking that since everyone wanted to be his stepfather, he had to choose someone he liked. For example, Yan Hanqing, who treated him well and was close to him. Little Baozi had a special place in Xiao Qing's heart. If little Baozi did not like her, Yan Qiue would have to suffer for a long time. After beating little Baozi up, Xiao Qing talked to Yan Hanqing and the others about what had happened recently. At that time, Xiao Qing and the zombie king jumped into the river together, followed by Dai. Then, Yan Pingshan called for reinforcements. After the reinforcements arrived, the first thing they did was to search the river for Xiao Qing and Dai. They searched along the river for a long time, but still could not find Xiao Qing. Many people thought that Xiao Qing must be dead, but Yan Pingshan and Mengshan did not want to give up. At that time, Yan Hanqing and the others also came. After searching for a few days, they had to give up temporarily. Yan Hanqing and the others followed Meng Shen and the others to Linchuan survivor base. After they gathered, they searched along the river. As long as it was a survivor base, they would go in and ask about it. When they arrived at Linchuan survivor base, they were in despair. Unexpectedly, they ran into Xiaoqing when they were about to leave. Xiaoqing also talked about her experiences during this period of time. Naturally, she skimmed over some things that shouldn't be said, and emphasized that Yan Qiue had saved her. Sure enough, as soon as Yan Qiue said that, the people in the car looked at Yan Qiue with much gentler eyes. Xiaoqing's team of superpowered people were all Xiaoqing's closest people. The smaller the team was, the harder it was for newcomers to join. Especially when there was competition. However, Yan Qiue was Xiaoqing's savior, so they were very grateful to Yan Qiue, so they were more tolerant of Gu Ning. Even Little Bun's impression of Yan Qiue had changed a little. Of course, if the fact that Yan Qiue beat them to it was exposed, Yan Hanqing and Gu Chuan might tear him apart. In fact, the first person who met Xiaoqing was Dai. Dai and Xiaoqing had sex once, and those men were all upset, but they also understood that they had no choice in that situation. But Yan Qiue was nothing. To be frank, everything should be done according to the order of first come, first served, right? Why did he want to kill her halfway? He didn't even ask those men who agreed with him. These men were well aware of Xiaoqing's character. They couldn't win her heart just because they could win her body. She was a very opinionated person. The more opinionated she was, the harder it was for others to win her heart in this aspect. Therefore, none of those men tried to give up on Dai. How could they give up on such a woman? It would be a lifelong thing for them. Who would be so stupid to give up on her? The distance from Linchuan to Jingdu wasn't far, but it wasn't close either. After all, the distance was calculated as a straight line. However, there was a mountain between Linchuan survivor base and Jingdu survivor base. Chapter 173. If you wanted to cross the mountain directly, you couldn't drive an RV. According to the height of the mountain, even if you drove an off-road vehicle, the chassis would be broken. Therefore, it was necessary to take a detour. At night, they slept in the car. Once they put the seats down, they could use it as a bed. Although it was a little narrow, in this post-apocalyptic world, this condition was considered good. Xiaoqing didn't sleep. She sat on the roof of the RV. On the one hand, she was patrolling at night. On the other hand, she couldn't sleep, so she was sewing clothes with the help of the faint moonlight. The python was very long, and the skin was enough to make a protective soft armor for each of them, like a vest. After all, Yan Hanqing and the others were different from Xiaoqing. Although they were paranormals, they would die if their hearts were hit. Therefore, Xiaoqing had to think about how to make them safer. The snake's skin was very tough. At the very least, she and Yan Qiue had only left a white mark on the snake's skin after fighting it for a long time. Although the defense of the skin was certainly not as good as when the snake was still alive, ordinary knives and guns couldn't penetrate it. The first thing Xiaoqing made was for Little Bun. He was the one who saved the most material. The small piece of material was enough to make a vest for him. If it were someone else, they might not be able to make the python skin. Xiaoqing used the thorns from the vines to make a needle. She pierced the needle from the inside and threaded the thread. It was a little troublesome, but the finished product looked good. At 2:00, when everyone was asleep, Yan Qiue suddenly climbed out of the RV and climbed on the roof. Why are you still awake? It's not good for your health if you don't sleep in the middle of the night. Xiaoqing sorted out the rest of the material, then slowly cut a piece. When she cut, she directly used the space crack, which was a special test of her control. It was another special practice for Xiaoqing. After climbing up, Yan Qiue lay down on Xiaoqing's legs. After a while, she said, "Do they all dislike me? I'm just not used to it." Xiaoqing patted his head and comforted him, then said, "After all, not long after the apocalypse, we have been going out on missions together. They will definitely feel uncomfortable if someone suddenly comes in, but they will get used to it." Even Yan Hanqing and the others couldn't wait for him to go back to Linchuan Survivor Base and never come back. They were used to it. Pan Pan and the others are all very nice people. You'll know after getting along with them for a while. You gave up everything to come with me. No matter what, I won't treat you unfairly. Xiaoqing chuckled. She suddenly felt that they were like a poor scholar and a young lady who had eloped in ancient times, but their identities had been swapped. Yan Qiue almost blurted out, "I just want a status." However, he swallowed the words back. Instead, he acted like a spoiled child and rolled around in Xiaoqing's arms. "I have nothing but you. You have to protect me well. Don't let others bully me. After all, I'm so delicate." Xiaoqing wanted to kick him down. If the people in Linchuan Survivor Base heard Yan Qiue's words, they would probably die of anger. Delicate? Why don't you go to heaven? Okay, go back to sleep. It's almost dawn. Xiaoqing kicked Yan Qiue down. He persistently climbed back. "I really can't sleep. Let's talk. For example, air dye." When he mentioned air dye, Xiaoqing was stunned. The corners of her eyes were slightly wet. It wasn't that she was weak, but when she thought of that silly little zombie whose whereabouts were unknown, even her iron heart felt sour. She remembered clearly the days when she was with air dye. Even the awkward expression when air dye was forced to cut her nails was imprinted in her mind. Air dye was very silly. Even among zombies, he was definitely the most silly one. Otherwise, why would he be abandoned and come all the way here? But what she cared about was that silly air dye. He didn't know how to speak, nor did he know how to express his feelings. He only knew how to protect her at the moment of life and death. In the end, he even jumped into the river with her. How silly could such a zombie be? Yan Qiue looked at Xiaoqing's appearance and knew that it was not good. He brought up a topic that shouldn't be brought up. He originally wanted to talk to Xiaoqing and talk about their feelings. But now, he brought out the feelings that Xiaoqing had for air dye in her heart. There was probably no chance tonight. Yan Qiue quickly leaned forward and kissed Xiaoqing. "Good night, I'm going to sleep first. Then I'll go back to the car." Xiaoqing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She was too lazy to make any more soft armor. She threw away the materials and lay on the roof of the car, wanting to look at the stars. But in this weather, even the moonlight in the sky was hazy. There were no stars. In the past, she and air dye were on the night watch together. Air dye would always stick to her. It was lively, not as cold and lonely as it was now. On the other side, as soon as Yan Qiue got back to the car, he saw several pairs of eyes staring at him like wolves, which directly scared him. Especially Gu Pan Pan, she directly moved to Gu Chuan's side and whispered, "Only crying children can drink milk. Brother, why are you so stupid?" Yan Qiue was speechless. Gu Chuan just glanced at Gu Pan Pan, then lay down and continued to sleep. However, Yan Hanqing got up. As soon as he got up, Gu Pan Pan and Yan Qiue both stared at him. As expected, Yan Hanqing climbed onto the roof of the car. The two immediately pricked up their ears, fearing that Yan Hanqing would do something beastly. "Why did you line up to chat with me tonight?" Xiaoqing moved her butt and made space for Yan Hanqing. Yan Hanqing just put the coat on Xiaoqing and said, "It's windy at night, and it's uncomfortable. Why don't you go back to the car? You should be fine. Xiaoqing tightened the coat, and the faint loneliness and pretentiousness in her heart disappeared with the wind. Chapter 174. On the third day, they were supposed to arrive at the survivor base in the capital. However, they encountered a small accident on the way. It was a full moon, and the zombies were rioting. Even Xiaoqing and Little Bun were inevitably affected. Little Bun was fine, as he was only at level 2. His strength was not high, so he was less affected. However, Xiaoqing was already at level 4. The higher the level, the greater the influence. She had not yet lost her mind, but at this rate, it would be difficult for her to control her various impulses when she reached level 6. Moreover, Xiaoqing had touched flesh and blood. Once the desire for flesh and blood broke out, it was difficult to control. Fortunately, her willpower was very strong, and she suppressed this impulse. Although Yan Qiue was very willing to provide blood for Xiaoqing, once it became an addiction, it was not a good thing for Xiaoqing. After the night of the full moon, it could be said that there was a desolation everywhere. After all, it was not only the zombies that were rioting, but also the mutant animals. Xiaoqing asked Xiaotong to search around with her spiritual power. After finding no particularly strong zombies around, they continued to move forward. After walking for a few miles, they saw a group of people. A group of people with ragged clothes and blood stains. At first glance, they knew that they had experienced a fierce battle. They were clustered around a young man and a young woman. The two people looked very embarrassed, but they were much better than the people around them. As soon as they saw Xiaoqing's car driving over, their eyes lit up. They hurried forward to stop the car. They were so fast that they almost hit the car. As soon as the car stopped, someone knocked on the window. Sitting in the front passenger seat was Yan Qiue. He opened the window and asked, "What's the matter?" The underlying meaning was that if there was nothing, hurry up and get out of the way. The man's expression stiffened. Before he could say anything, the young girl behind him walked over and pushed him away. Her eyes were sparkling as she said, "It's like this. We encountered a zombie tide last night. We used up all our supplies. Can we buy some from you?" Yan Qiue turned around and glanced at Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing nodded. It was not a big deal to sell them some food and water. It was a small favor, so she would help if she could. "Market price, how much do you want?" Yan Qiue asked lazily. The girl calculated for a moment, then said, "If it's water, 3 bottles will be enough. We need food for 5 people, 5 level 2 zombie nuclei, and 8 level 1 zombie nuclei. Is that okay?" The young girl's price was already very fair. Yan Qiue nodded and took out the portion she wanted and made a deal with the young girl. After the deal was done, Yan Qiue patiently waited for the young girl to leave. However, the young girl did not leave. Instead, she asked shyly, "We don't have any transportation. You are going to the survival base in the capital. Can we hitch a ride? My family is in the capital. If you can help, you will be rewarded generously." Normally, Xiaoqing would definitely refuse. It was not a wise choice to let a group of strangers get on the car. However, she urgently needed a few people who were familiar with the survival base in the capital. It would be easier for her to find the heir dye. These people happened to come, which saved her the time to search for them after arriving in the capital. Even if they had bad intentions, they would not be able to do anything to her. This was the confidence brought by the ultimate power. Therefore, Xiaoqing calmly gave Yan Qiue a look. Yan Qiue agreed, "Get on." The young girl was very happy. She looked at Yan Qiue with a bit of ambiguity. On the contrary, The young man looked at Yan Qiue coldly. Chapter 175. The five of them got into the car one after another. Although the interior of the caravan was very spacious, it was still a little crowded with 5 more people. The girl was stunned as soon as she got into the car. Yan Qiue was very good-looking with exquisite features. However, when she got into the car, she realized that there were 2 other men in the car whose looks were not inferior to Yan Qiue's. One of them was Yan Hanqing. He was the kind of man who was handsome with a hint of toughness. In addition, he had a special temperament cultivated from years of military service. He was also the best among men. Although Gu Chuan was silent, no one would not notice him. He was between Yan Hanqing and Yan Qiue. He had a delicate coldness, but he did not lose his heroic spirit. The biggest similarity between the 3 men was that they were all very handsome. How handsome were they? The young man was also quite handsome, but he was like a speck of dust compared to the 3 of them. Especially when the 4 of them sat together, the huge gap suddenly became obvious, which made the young man's already pale face even paler. Xiaoqing, who was surrounded by the 3 men, was very calm. She hugged Little Bun and sat inwards, making some space for them. Only then did they manage to sit steadily in the car. Yan Hanqing continued to drive forward. The girl's gaze stopped on Little Bun in Xiaoqing's arms, and then she deliberately asked, "What a cute baby. Your husband must be very outstanding to be able to give birth to such a good-looking baby." Xiaoqing smiled slightly. "He's already dead." The girl immediately heaved a sigh of relief, but in the blink of an eye, that sigh of relief returned. Although the few people in the car were all handsome men, she liked Yan Qiue the most. The moment the window opened and the girl saw Yan Qiue, she made up her mind to chase after him. If the child in Xiaoqing's arms was Yan Qiue's, it would be very difficult to deal with. Fortunately, it was not. She also found out that Xiaoqing was a widow. In this way, Xiaoqing's threat was reduced a lot. It was just a lot smaller, but it didn't mean that it was gone. After all, Xiaoqing was Yan Qiue's partner. Who knew if she had any other relationship with Yan Qiue? However, the girl was very confident. In terms of looks, she didn't think she was any worse than Xiaoqing. In terms of strength, she was already a level 3 paranormal. In terms of strength, her father was the leader of a large mercenary group. More importantly, she was young. No matter how she looked at it, she would definitely beat Xiaoqing. Speaking of this, it was necessary to talk about the mercenary system. The mercenary system in Jingdu was similar to the superpowered team in the survivor base of S-City. It could be said that the mercenary group was the evolved version of the superpowered team. In Jingdu, a superpowered team with less than 50 people was considered a superpowered team, and more than 50 people could form a mercenary group. People like Xiaoqing, who had less than 10 people in a superpowered team, could be said to be countless in Jingdu. Many superpowered teams would not choose to recruit new members after losing members. Instead, they would directly disband and join a mercenary group. After chatting with Xiaoqing for a while, the girl patted her chest and promised, "My father has formed a mercenary group. It has been established for a long time, and it is quite powerful in Jingdu. If you go to Jingdu, I will be your tour guide. If you want to stay in Jingdu, you can also join my family's mercenary group. I can ask my father to give you a position, and the lowest one will be a team leader." Xiaoqing just smiled and didn't say anything. After a few more words with Xiaoqing, the girl turned her head and talked to Yan Qiue. When she was talking to Yan Qiue, the young man beside her kept looking at Yan Qiue with a sinister look. Xiaoqing couldn't help but frown. This girl named Kai Yingying was obviously interested in Yan Qiue, and the young man beside her seemed to have a good relationship with Kai Yingying. It was very likely that they were lovers. Chapter 176. However, Kai Ying had already brazenly approached Yan Qiue, and the young man still did not dare to say anything. Then, there were only two possibilities. The first was that he was timid. This possibility was not big. After all, not many men would not react when they were about to be cuckolded. Moreover, it was right in front of them. Secondly, he was a kept man, so he didn't dare to say anything about his sugar daddy's behavior. He vented his anger on Yan Qiue not because he loved Kai Ying, but because he was afraid that Yan Qiue would steal his sugar daddy. A girl who kept a man as a kept man was definitely not a good match for Yan Qiue. Xiao Qing frowned. She didn't realize that she was subconsciously rejecting this matter. Yan Qiue didn't care about this girl at all. He didn't even bother to answer her perfunctorily. In the beginning, he responded, but in the end, he was annoyed, so he closed his eyes and lay on the seat, covering his ears. It was said that a group of women was equal to 500 ducks. Kai Ying alone was equal to 500 ducks. Since Kai Ying got in the car, the atmosphere in the car was very strange. At noon, when it was time for lunch, a group of people got out of the car and dispersed. Kai Ying was determined to chase Yan Qiue. Wherever Yan Qiue went, she would follow him. I'm going to hunt something. You can start a fire first. Xiao Qing waved her hand and went out with Xiao Tong. Xiao Tong wasn't as good at searching as Meng Xin. She was good at defense and attack, but she was still much better than ordinary people. For example, now she could release her spiritual power to detect whether there were mutated animals nearby. When she determined the location, Xiao Qing could directly go and hunt. There were many people this time, so Xiao Qing deliberately walked a little longer to hunt more prey. However, she didn't expect to meet a wild boar. Wild boars were rare and usually lived in some deep mountains. However, after Doomsday, those animals had been mutated and their abilities were greatly enhanced. They could be found everywhere. Xiao Qing naturally wouldn't let go of such a good prey. She tied it up and dragged it back. The fresher the meat, the tastier it was. Therefore, Xiao Qing didn't kill it, but tied it up with vines. Unexpectedly, Little Bun insisted on keeping the wild boar when she dragged it back. Yiye was fine. Yiye was a small rabbit, so it was fine to carry it around. However, the wild boar was so big. Where could he keep it? Would he have to tie it to the back of the car in the future and drag it when he ran for his life? That would be a joke. Therefore, Xiao Qing and Little Bun squatted in front of the wild boar. Xiao Qing said to Little Bun sternly, "You can't keep it." Little Bun pouted. His big eyes were misty and he looked very pitiful. Why? Mama had never rejected him. This was the first time. Did Mama not love him anymore? Because Yiye will be jealous. Xiao Qing patted Little Bun's head and said, "Do you like Yiye?" Little Bun said crisply, "Yes." If you like Yiye, you have to be wholehearted. Since you have another pet, shouldn't you divide your love into two parts? Yiye will be sad. Xiao Qing said patiently. Little Bun was enlightened. He looked at the wild boar and then looked at Yiye. No matter how he looked at it, Yiye was cuter. He immediately abandoned the wild boar. Alright, I won't raise it. After that, Little Bun sneakily leaned over and said, "Mama, you already have desire. You have to be wholehearted. You can't share your love with Yan Qiue. Otherwise, desire will be sad." Xiao Qing looked at the Little Bun's serious face and couldn't help but laugh. "You're so mischievous. Go play somewhere else. Mommy is going to prepare the food." Chapter 177. Little Bowsy ran away with his Yiye. Xiaoqing pulled out the knife and cut the blood. She removed the skin and bones, took out the internal organs, and put them aside. She cut the skin and meat, marinated some of them, and sliced the rest into slices. How about barbecue for lunch today? Xiaoqing found a large iron plate and placed the meat neatly on it. In addition to the pork, there was also chicken and rabbit meat. They were placed separately and filled the plate. Since she said that she would eat like this, naturally no one objected. Yan Hanqing went straight to the car to take out the grill and set it up with Yan Qiue. Gu Chuan took the prepared charcoal and Gu Panpan carried the seasoning out. Even Xiao Tong and Xiao Qing cleaned the meat slices together. Kai Yingying and the others were stunned when they saw them working together. There were some who took their children out, but they had never seen a group of paranormals who lived like a tourist during the apocalypse and had picnics every day. Especially Xiao Qing and the others, they had everything. It was obvious that they were experienced. It was not the first time they did this. Xiao Qing cut the meat into a medium thickness. The thicker ones were used to barbecue, and the thinner ones were boiled on an iron plate. They could be dipped in the sauce and eaten. Xiao Qing did not waste the internal organs. She cleaned the edible parts and stored them. They could be eaten after cooking them in the evening. After that, 3 big plates of meat slices were placed in front of the group. There was half a wild boar and several small wild animals. It was enough for a few more people. The barbecue rack was set up, the charcoal was heated, and the seasoning like cumin was put on one side. Xiao Qing began to barbecue. The group of people sat around, each holding a bowl. Once the meat was cooked, Xiao Qing would sprinkle the seasoning on it and give it to them. In the beginning, Kai Yingying and the others were still a little reserved and embarrassed to reach out their bowls. Later, they reached out faster than anyone else. After all, Xiao Qing's roasting speed was very fast. If they were late, there would be no more food. Wild boar meat was more chewy and tasted better than domestic boar meat. This mutated wild boar tasted even better. After being roasted, there was a layer of golden oil on the surface. With seasoning sprinkled on it, it tasted fresh and fragrant, making people almost swallow their tongues. The chicken and rabbit meat were also very tasty and were especially popular among the younger ones. Xiao Qing also roasted some meat slices until they were almost cooked and dipped them in the sauce. Yan Qiue especially liked this way of eating. The dipping sauce was made by Xiao Qing herself and it tasted very good. Yan Qiue finished a pile of meat slices by herself. They ate happily, but Xiao Qing didn't stop. When she was almost done with the barbecue, she took out a wild boar leg. She roasted it directly over the fire and brushed oil on it as she roasted it. In the later stage, she didn't need to brush it anymore because the golden oil would come out by itself. Some oil dripped into the fire, and with a sizzle, there was a burnt smell. The group of people who were eating immediately raised their heads and stared at the boar leg. The boar leg had been roasted until it was golden and crispy. Xiao Qing cut it with a knife, and the white and tender meat could be seen steaming from the cut. She sat there and cut a piece, dipped it in the sauce, and ate it. In fact, the meat didn't taste much in her mouth and she would spit it out later. However, after not eating for a long time, she felt like she was no longer human. Although Xiao Qing wasn't a living person, she was unwilling to admit that she was already a monster in her heart. Yan Qiue immediately came over quietly. He blinked his beautiful eyes and looked at the boar leg in Xiao Qing's hand. Xiao Qing sliced a few pieces and put them in his bowl. After Yan Qiue ate it, he continued to stare at the boar leg in Xiao Qing's hand. Xiao Qing couldn't help but laugh and scold, "Look at you. Aren't there some roasted meat slices over there? Go eat that. It's not as fragrant as the one in your hand." Yan Qiue said matter-of-factly, "Anyway, it's such a big leg. You definitely can't finish it. I'll help you finish it. Go away. Who needs you to finish it? Xiaoqing pointed at the small pot at the side. Don't eat too much. Leave some space in your stomach. There's still a pot of soup for you to finish. Yan Qiue, QAQ. Chapter 178. After solving the problem of lunch, the group continued to move forward. Along the way, Kai Yingying was telling them about the Jingdu survivor base. Xiaoqing listened quietly, occasionally asking questions that were neither painful nor itchy. Slowly, they got to the bottom of the story. There were a total of 4 top mercenary groups in the Jingdu survivor base. Kai Yingying's family's mercenary group had more than 300 people, and more than 200 of them were ability users. However, in Jingdu, they weren't even ranked near the top, let alone the top. They could only be considered above average. Among the 4 mercenary groups, one of them was made up entirely of beautiful women. The leader was Wu Jiaojiao, and the mercenary group was named after her nickname, Thorns and Roses. Although Thorns and Roses wasn't the strongest among the 4 mercenary groups, the charm of beautiful women was great. A group of beautiful women was enough to make many people willing to go through fire and water for them, so very few people were willing to offend them. The second mercenary group was famous for its numbers. There were nearly 1,000 people in this mercenary group, and among them, there were 500 to 600 paranormals. The leader was a metal paranormal. This mercenary group was called Mad Demon. There were no requirements to join the mercenary group. As long as you were a paranormal, you would be accepted. The third mercenary group was called Ice. There were more than 100 people in the group, and they walked the path of the elite. Among the 100 or so people, 100 of them were paranormals, and all of them were above level 2. The leader was said to be an Ice paranormal. The last mercenary group was more strange. There were only a few dozen people in the group, but it was ranked as one of the top 4 mercenary groups in the Kyoto. It was said that among the dozens of people in the group, the weakest was a level 3 paranormal. Every one of them had a unique skill. They kept a record in the Kyoto, and that was, they had a 100% completion rate for all the missions they took. This was undoubtedly very scary. The top mercenary groups in the Kyoto definitely had one thing in common, and that was that there was at least one level 4 paranormal in the group. It was said that the leader and deputy leader of the last mercenary group, Dark Thorn, were both level 4 paranormals, and the leader was only one step away from level 5. Xiaoqing thought that her strength had improved very quickly, but in the end, she found that there was always someone better than her. Kai Yingying's family's mercenary group was called Storm. Although it wasn't as awesome as the other mercenary groups, it was still a large mercenary group with 300 members. Therefore, Kai Yingying was still very proud of it. Perhaps it was because both males and females wanted to show off in front of the person they liked. Kai Yingying had indeed revealed a lot this time. Previously, she had let Xiaoqing know that her strength was among the top in the capital. For example, in Kai Yingying's family, the strongest person was her father, who was currently a level 3 paranormal. As long as he broke through to level 4, their mercenary group would truly step into the ranks of first-rate mercenary groups. In addition to the mercenary group, there was one more thing to note. Kyoto was still under the control of the country's leaders, so the rules in Kyoto were relatively complete. There were also simple laws. In general, it was stricter than the average survivor base, but also more stable than those extremely chaotic bases. Therefore, the population of Kyoto survivor base was equal to 2 Linchuan survivor bases, and the population of S-City survivor base was even more incomparable. After learning about Kyoto, it was almost afternoon. Xiaoqing and the others stopped to rest for the night. Dinner was still prepared by Xiaoqing. In fact, Xiaoqing liked to cook. More importantly, Yan Hanqing was her assistant, so Xiaoqing didn't need to do anything. Therefore, she was able to cook very quickly. Chapter 179. After making soup, they were full and ready to sleep. There was too little space in the car, so it was not suitable to continue sleeping in the car. They had to set up tents. However, there were only 2 tents. Even if they were set up, they could not fit more than 10 people. Therefore, someone had to sleep in the car. It was safer in the car. In the end, it was decided that Little Bun, Xiaotong, Gu Panpan, and Yan Qiue would sleep in the car. The others would sleep in the tents. Xiaoqing's people had a tent, and Kai Yingying's people had a tent. Xiaoqing was still responsible for the night watch. In the first half of the night, a man from each side was responsible for the night watch. In the second half of the night, Xiaoqing was responsible for the night watch. Xiaoqing also slept in the car in the first half of the night. After 12 o'clock, she went out to change shifts with the other 2 people. Xiaoqing slept soundly until midnight, then got up to change shifts. In fact, there was no danger in the vicinity, because they were not far from the capital. In this location, the ordinary zombies had been cleared, unless there were wandering zombies or mutated animals, but the number would be very small. Therefore, the so-called night watch actually meant that they did not sleep at night and paid attention to the surrounding situation. If they were really sleepy, there was no danger in taking a nap. Xiaoqing was a very responsible person and she did not need to sleep, so naturally, she would not be lazy. In the early morning, Xiaoqing sat on a big branch, swinging her legs to enjoy the night wind. Suddenly, a person sneaked out of the tent. At this moment, there were 2 people outside. One was Yan Qiue, who was peeing, and the other was Xiaoqing. As soon as the person came out, Xiaoqing noticed. After all, she was quite conspicuous. Yan Qiue did not notice that he was sleepily behind the tree, and then took out, cough cough, peeing. While he was peeing, he was suddenly hugged from behind. Yan Qiue, who was still in a daze, was startled and almost did not want to do anything. As soon as he was hugged, the first thing Yan Qiue did was to pull up his pants, stuff his baby, and then break away from the hug. Yan Qiue was very careful. As soon as the person hugged him from behind, he came to the conclusion that it was definitely not Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing would not do such a thing, and she was taller than the person behind him. After confirming that it was not Xiaoqing, it did not matter who the person behind him was, because as long as it was not Xiaoqing, even if the emperor came, he would not be hugged. Ko Heng, his body and spirit, they were both his wife. No one should even think about touching it. After shaking her off, Yan Qiue heard a muffled groan. He turned around and saw Kai Yingying squatting behind him with a pitiful look on her face. She held on to her ankle and said, "I sprained it." When she said this, Kai Yingying's expression was very fragile, and she looked very pitiful. At least, she could arouse all kinds of desires in men, such as the desire to protect, to conquer, and so on. Among normal men, 9 out of 10 would not be able to stand such a delicate beauty like her acting coquettishly. The remaining one was called Yan Qiue. He was very calm. "What are you doing?" Kai Yingying had never seen a man who did not know how to take care of women. He was simply unromantic to the extreme. The beauty was already so obvious, why was he still pretending to be serious? Wasn't it obvious what she meant? In the middle of the night, a man and a woman alone, what else could they do? Did she have to say it out loud? Kai Yingying's face was a little red. Although she was a very bold girl, she would still be very shy if she said something like asking for sex, okay? Yan Qiue was exceptionally cold. "You should go back to sleep." Chapter 180. Kai Yingying's originally rosy face turned a little pale. She said with some difficulty, "Chiyue, you know what I mean." Yan Chiyue said very calmly, "I said you should go back to sleep." Wasn't it an obvious rejection? Kai Yingying had never been rejected so ruthlessly in her life. While she was a little embarrassed, she was also a little angry. "Why did you reject me? Am I not good looking? Or do you mind if I have another boyfriend? He's just a dispensable existence. His existence is just to make me happy. If you mind, I can kick him away immediately. Don't be mistaken, okay? I have no interest in you at all, so isn't it natural to reject you?" Yan Chiyue's lips had a cold smile. He tilted his head. If it wasn't because Xiaoqing was about to go to the capital and he didn't want to cause trouble for Xiaoqing, he would have already pulled out the tongue of this chattering little girl. Kai Yingying's face turned even paler. She couldn't help but cover her mouth. It looked like she was about to cry. After a while, she had a flash of inspiration. "You have someone you like, right? That's why you rejected me." Yan Chiyue didn't say anything. This was the truth. He didn't need to explain anything. Did he need a reason to dislike someone? If he really had to find a reason, it would be that she was the best one he had ever seen. Who would be willing to compromise? Moreover, he had not only seen her, but also had her. So he was even more unwilling to compromise. How am I worse than her? Kai Yingying didn't need to think to know who Yan Chiyue liked. There were only 4 women in this group, including her. Although Gu Ponpon's appearance was delicate and pretty, she had a carefree personality. Xiao Tong could also be considered pretty, but she was mute. Although Xiaoqing was a widow, she was too beautiful. Kai Yingying knew that in terms of appearance, she was definitely not worse than Xiaoqing. However, there was one area where she was not as good as Xiaoqing, and that was her temperament. Temperament was something that couldn't be forced. It was gradually cultivated and tempered by time. Only then would it have its current fragrance. Therefore, there were many women who, even if they were no longer beautiful, still had an intoxicating temperament. That was why there was the term "still charming." Xiaoqing was such a woman. She was good-looking and had an outstanding temperament. Even if she was a widow, many men would like her. But Kai Yingying just couldn't understand. "I don't look worse than her, and she's a widow. I've never married. I'm still young. Why do you like her but don't want to be with me?" Yan Chiyue's expression immediately turned ugly. These words were particularly harsh to him. He really wanted to say, "How is Xiaoqing worse than you? Who gave you the confidence to compare yourself with Xiaoqing? You can't even compare to one of her little toes, okay?" Yan Chiyue didn't even have the desire to talk to Kai Yingying. He walked forward with a cold face. Yan Chiyue felt that if he stayed any longer, he would really not be able to control himself and kill Kai Yingying. That would bring a lot of trouble to Xiaoqing. Although he was never afraid of trouble, he didn't want to bring any trouble to Xiaoqing. "I'll give you 2 choices. First, shut your mouth now and go back to sleep. Second, I'll let you sleep forever." Yan Chiyue curled his lips. When he said this, his expression was exceptionally cold and sinister, with a hint of gorgeousness. This kind of Yan Chiyue was simply dazzling to look at, but also so dangerous that it made people's hands and feet turn cold. Kai Yingying bit her lower lip and said confidently, "You won't kill me." Even if it was because of her identity, Yan Chiyue wouldn't do it. Although she said so, Kai Yingying clearly felt Yan Chiyue's murderous intent. He really wanted to kill her. This thought made Kai Yingying very discouraged. It was the first time in her life that she liked someone so much. It was also the first time she wanted someone so badly. However, this person only wanted to kill her. Wasn't this a very desperate thing? Really? Just because of your identity. The coldness in Yan Qiue's eyes was released without any scruples. If she really annoyed him, killing a person would really be like eating and drinking. However, Kai Yingying was quite sensible. When she saw Yan Qiue's expression getting colder and colder, she knew that his patience was about to reach its limit. Kai Yingying didn't dare to challenge Yan Qiue's bottom line. She got up and ran away. When she was about to leave, she said very seriously, "I won't give up." The more dangerous a man was, the more impulsive she was to conquer him. Yan Qiue rubbed his forehead and felt like he was about to collapse. Soon, his hand stiffened because Xiao Qing's joking voice came from behind him. "You're very popular. It's just that you're too cold to girls." Wait. Did Xiao Qing hear everything just now? QAQ.